Hilmar, it's really great to have you. And I want to dive into your new project, but tell me, go all the way back to the very, very beginning. Like, how did you get the spark? Like, how did you first get into computers and world building and all of that?
Well, I mean, so the beginning, if we go all the way to the beginning, then it probably starts when I got my first computer. Like, if we go all the way to that beginning. So yeah, so I am in Iceland. I'm probably 9 years old, and I see an ad in a newspaper for a Sinclair Spectrum, which then I apparently need to have. And I had no idea what a computer was. I didn't know anyone who had a computer. I'd never seen a computer. I just saw this ad in a in a newspaper. My parents did not agree with me that I needed this, and just says like, we don't have the money to be buying computers here. So I take out the paper out to collect the money. It was 6,450 ISK, which was a lot of money back in those days. But I was able to collect that together by being a newspaper distributor. And I went to the next town over to buy one. And then I spent like a week to try to connect the Sinclair Spectrum to my black and white TV that my parents had. The big challenge of that is I didn't know English, they didn't know English. So it took a while to figure it out. Then I was typing in programs, and at some point I'm typing in a game. It was kind of the wall breaker game, and I was modding that game. That was probably when the bug was planted. Then I spent my years following, buying computers a lot, working to buy computers was what I spent my time doing. Then at some point I have this idea of what I should do for university, and I was thinking like I was generally quite good in sort of STEM topics, so I was thinking like chemistry, biology, physics. I was thinking about these things, and I also thought about computers, but I couldn't really fathom like what would you really do if you went to university to study computer science. Okay, I guess I could be making accounting software or work at an ad agency. There were no real sort of role models in Iceland. There was one guy who was making like antivirus software. Sounded kind of cool, but maybe a little esoteric. So, but still, for some reason, I went to computer science. And I remember like after a year of doing computer science, I'm sitting down with my grandfather for lunch or at his house, or like my grandmother was cooking for both of us for lunch, and I'm like, I don't really get the point of this. We're just learning this endless math, and it's I don't really see how this becomes a job. And my grandfather, who was a plumber, he says, "Well, Hilmar, we generally finish what we start." And I think that's largely the reason why I finished my computer science degree, in the middle of which I was recruited by a VRML browser company in Iceland. So that actually was the start of my career then. As I was there trying to finish university or my computer science degree, then I'm kind of headhunted by a company that was here in Iceland, founded in '92, believe that or not. And that company was making a VRML browser, virtual reality modeling language, a browser for that kind of standard. And VRML was supposed to be like the HTML of the 3D internet. Back in those days, people were very much like, okay, first the internet was text, then the internet was 2D, And then obviously very quickly the internet is going to be 3D. And VRML was like a markup language to make 3D worlds. And this particular browser, which was called OS Virtual, had we've added social context to the worlds. Generally, just like with web pages, those in the day was a pretty solitary experience. You're just browsing the web and nobody was there with you. But we added this shared browsing where you would have avatars. You could customize your avatar. You could see other avatars. It was very sort of Neil Stephenson, Snowcross kind of inspired. It had the street as a bootloader and those kind of things. It was interesting with that is that it was largely about just creating stuff, kind of like the web was at the time. The web during kind of the late 90s wasn't a very transactional phenomenon. So while we were playing MUDs, like sort of multi-user dungeons, text-based on mainframes, or on like single servers was really what it was. Then this VRML browser was very much focused on creativity. Like you could just create stuff and you were just there browsing and having fun. There wasn't really any transaction or context or consequence to it. So this today is very easy to explain with the difference between Minecraft survival mode and Minecraft creative mode. So the VRML browser was very much Minecraft creative mode. Like you just build stuff and people came there to see the stuff you were built and maybe walk around and point at it, and there wasn't any PvP or PvE for that matter. And it quickly was abundantly clear to us that was working on this in the retention power of this kind of an experience compared to something like playing a MUD was way less. So the CCP was kind of founded on the basis of this metaverse stuff might happen at some point in time, but what we obviously know to be working are games, either in the form of MUDs or in the form of Ultima Online, which was coming out there the same year as CCP is founded. CCP founded like summer '97, and MUD is kind of now Ultima Online is kind of coming online in a similar time frame, and that very much provide the kind of archetype of okay, we want to do games rather than kind of solve all use cases of the web in 3D. And then it turned into a very sort of utilitarian way of thinking about like, okay, what kind of game can we make? We're there in Iceland. Nobody had made a game before. Nobody in Iceland had made a game before. Most of us hadn't seen a game developer from afar even. So, but I mean, obviously we had a lot of experience in doing like internet software and graphics and all that from the VRML days. So we thought about, okay, it probably is a space game because that means we can get the graphics quite good. At those days, games were pretty far away from being photorealistic. Whereas like a space game, you can more easily kind of focus on. I mean, the early versions of EVE Online were quite simple. It was just there's a spaceship, there's a planet, there's a skybox, and there's a lens flare. Almost that was what you really sort of needed to make. So so focusing the graphics power, and actually we did it only for hardware accelerated graphics, mainly because getting our software renderer up and running was not really in our sort of skill set / timeline. So by just okay, it's space. We can make it quite photorealistic for that, especially if we require a hardware accelerator. And then also space is largely empty. We can procedurally generate the content without anyone really kind of noticing it. Space is kind of, in many ways, at least in our own eyes, kind of procedurally generated. Obviously, everything in nature is mostly procedurally generated by some definition of procedural generation. But one of the team members, Kjartan Pierre, he had a PhD in physics, so he came up with kind of the way to make various aspects of space very easily generated. So that quickly became like, okay, we can make kind of a game inspired, like a bit of Elite, a bit of Ultima Online, a bit of the experience of playing in a mud, make it space. If it's space, we can make a lot of territory. That probably means we can have everyone play the same game, because we can have the literal space for everyone to fit into that. Then the act is more about traffic control than it is about server scaling, even if obviously server scaling is a big part of it. So the name of the company literally means crowd control production. So if we are about crowd control, then at least doing the traffic control on a big map, everyone playing the same game. Then this focus on kind of the PKness and the hellscape came a lot from Ultima, like playing sort of PvP. Ultima inspired that quite a bit, and everything, all the drama and feelings that come around that. And then I think the capitalistic hellscape part of it came a lot from like Alien, Blade Runner, these kind of sort of chapter of sci-fi movies, which spoke to us dearly in our sort of late 20s. This is kind of all the ingredients that went into the soup. We've then tasted the soup a few times and jiggled it over time, but it's largely kind of stayed true to these origins.
Wow. VRML was really an amazing seminal project. I definitely got excited about it. And, I think that really might have been the tipping point with respect to virtual worlds, getting into that. Yeah. So, I think it's pretty exciting. That whole wall breaker thing, I did get to meet Steve Wozniak, who worked on single player Pong for Steve Jobs and Nolan Bushnell. So that kind of wall breaker thing, it's a tremendous kind of place to start. My first computer was actually an Atari 400 with 16K of RAM. And, but you were really far ahead of your time. You're describing kind of shared 3D spaces, probably in the 1994 timeframe. I guess really interested to try to understand kind of how you thought about this and how you thought about this as maybe an extension of web browsing. Obviously, this is really, really early days. So excited to hear about your perspective.
I mean, like with many things, it's often after the thing has been done and you look a bit in the back mirror. That's often where it's easier to rationalize where the intuition came from. If this was kind of the source of inspiration, there were a lot of philosophical, political, technical debates at the office. Like there was a lot of like sort of these kind of social science, economy, and discussion at the office, and all these kind of aspects of like what happens if there is one overly dominant corporation in one line and nobody can win and they won the game. What will happen to the game? Like what is human interaction versus meaningful human interaction? Death obviously is a very serious matter. So there were all these kind of things which were sort of in the discussion domain. So when then Eve comes out, like you said, I think the ingredients into the soup and the general mix of it was, I mean, pretty good. But then the dimension of players started to come in. And I think it's a perpetual thing with game developers where they, in many ways, underestimate the the impact that the players have on the game. We were always kind of building this. It's a sandbox. It's very laissez-faire. Come here, build your corporation, dominate the world, recruit your friends, fight your enemies. It's very interesting to go back to the sort of original definition of Eve as put on the box. We had Eve mostly distributed on CDs in a box back in the early days. So when we are sort of tuning the soup and all the players are providing their input, their speed through the content way faster, their ability to cooperate and sometimes take advantage of unforeseen game features. I could tell you the story of can mining at some point that is invented by players out of a debugging feature in the game that really allowed them to short circuit all the content kind of progression inside the game. So this topic of meaningful started to come up again and again, and certainly in the context of like the game is about human interaction, but is it just about any type of human interaction, or is the interaction a meaningful human interaction? So there's obsession about defining what is meaningful and what is meaning became like very much a topic, and that's where this phrase to make virtual worlds more meaningful than real life came about. And it's written down in 2008. We were doing some sort of vision workshop of like Collins sort of good to great of just defining values and core purpose and BHAGs and things like that. And it was very much okay. We want the interactions in this world, especially the interaction between people, to be meaningful. And then it was a lot about okay, what is meaning? Okay, let's just use the word and leave it not more defined than meaning. But how meaningful is it? And then we thought, okay, the high bar must be that the meaningful interaction in this world is more meaningful than meaningful interaction, or there is more of meaningful interaction in this virtual world than in the real world. And that became a whole debate of like, is that too dystopic? Is that a good thing? And whatever. And then we were very much debating as meaningful or more meaningful. Should it be as meaningful as real life, or should it be more meaningful than real life? And I think we ended up concluding of like, it seems like a shallow purpose to make it as meaningful, and certainly to make it slightly less meaningful than real life is not a good plan. But as meaningful also seems like, okay, if you're going for as meaningful, that means you can never exceed. Like, then you're always probably slightly under. So you will end up with something slightly less meaningful. But if you just go for more meaningful as a goal, even if it takes 100 years to make it, then you have something like a core purpose of like, we're gonna spend a millennia in making something that is more meaningful than real life. Then you can also go into very elaborate definition of what is real life. I mean, real life today is very different than real life 500 years ago, or like 5,000 years ago, or 50,000 years ago. So, I mean, the life is always changing anyway. And yeah, so that's kind of where it came. Like going for as meaningful as real life just felt like a bit of a weak goal.
Yeah, that is definitely amazing, and really appreciate the in-depth insight. So, how did this sort of economy part of it come out? And how did you come up with the design constraints, the sort of social interaction, economic interaction, human interaction, and kind of this idea of the making games that are more meaningful than real life, virtual worlds, right? So I guess to an outsider that sounds wildly ambitious, maybe a little dark. I think the ingredients you're mixing are tremendous. Obviously, Ultima Online, Blade Runner, cypherpunk, cyberpunk, dystopians, and obviously things like Tyrell Corporation, mega capitalism. So, you definitely have this kind of huge primordial soup. So I guess I'm really excited to hear sort of how did you sort of tune this and how did you create a design interaction space around this?
Yeah, so I think in this quest for meaning, like defining what is meaningful, then literally the first line in the Eve script is death is a serious matter. And I think the the probably the starkest definition of meaning is the difference between being alive and being dead. Probably being dead is not very meaningful. I think. I mean, the, the word is out on it. I guess we'll all find out somehow someday. But let's just start on the basis it is not meaningful to be dead. So it's more meaningful to be alive. So this transition moment of being alive and dead and maybe becoming alive again seems like an important loop. So that's why in EVE Online, the penalty of dying is pretty high. So we want, I mean, it's not permadeath. You're not dead and gone. Many have kind of fantasized about MMOs or virtual worlds with permadeath, but we didn't take it that far. We just made it's pretty serious. If you lose a fight in EVE Online, your spaceship is gone and you have to make a new one. And that might have taken you months of like toiling away in the asteroid mines, mining asteroids to make a spaceship, or do something else in the game to buy the materials to remake it, or buy it from somebody that specializes in making spaceships. So both that act of dying will mean that it's meaningful. You suffered a real loss. So losing something probably is some thread of like leads to meaning. If you're losing something and it's meaningful to you, it's probably because the thing you lost was meaningful to you. So and then you can take it from there. Okay, losing something to the game or losing something at the hand of another player is probably more meaningful to lose it at the hands of another player rather than lose it to the game, because that is probably you yourself that lost it. Like it seems more meaningful or more consequential to lose it at the hand of another player. And that is a form of violence. If somebody does something to you that is meaningful in a loss kind of a way, it probably is some definition of violence. I mean, it's obviously not physical violence. It's just pixel on a screen. But somebody did something onto you where you had loss, and it was very meaningful, and now you have a lot of feelings about it. Maybe you now have now you want to get even. You feel maybe shameful for having lost. Like there's a lot that comes from there. So then it becomes a world where violence is not regulated. And I'm getting to your point, I promise. I know this is a very long way. Yeah, it's a very long way to your point. So yeah, so um, usually if you think about dystopia and utopia, then a utopia is where we have figured that out. It's a world without violence. Everyone is happy. There's no loss. There's no. You could go there. That's why I think it's very hard to imagine a utopia, a meaningful utopia. It's at least hard for me to reconcile meaning and utopia because we seem to be built for scarcity, for loss aversion, for all these kind of things. And if those have all been neutered or taken away, is the world really a meaningful place? I mean, it could be. It's just hard to imagine that premise. Usually, anything, if you watch a movie about a utopia, there is usually an undercurrent of it is the few enforcing their will on their many. Maybe they do it with a very velvet gloved hand, but there is something about regulation of violence. Like there's a monopoly on violence. And if you look at the basic definition of a country is a place that has a monopoly on violence. Like the business plan of a country is to monopolize violence through police and military. Nobody else can do violence, only we can. And you can even the first rule of running like a wolf pack or a gorilla clan is about like there is somebody usually expressed as an alpha male, even if that's maybe debated back and forth. But there usually is somebody that has a monopoly on violence. Like they might allow it, but they generally regulate it, and it is the expectation from others in the grouping that the strong protect the weak and regulate violence in the system. So then when you think of creating a virtual world of meaning, then us, the people that make the game, we should not be the ones that have monopoly on violence. We should abdicate that monopoly we could hold, because otherwise we become like some supercharged nanny where everyone expects us, CCP, just to go and intervene with everything if there's somebody doing bad stuff to other people. But we decided not to do that. We decided to make a dystopia where there's no monopoly on violence. It is just the rule of the strongest. But because in a multiplayer game, especially a multiplayer game like EVE Online, where there are maybe hundreds of thousands of people in the same server, very different than most other games, then you can only monopolize violence by grouping together. So that's generally done in this form of a corporation, and often dystopic science fiction is ruled by evil mega corporations. But because the game design is such that a group of fairly inexperienced players should generally be able to group up and take down another sort of super powerful player, then there is like a regulation on violence on that end. So it becomes a lot about this, like death is a serious matter, death penalty, kind of not monopoly on violence, even if you regulate it a bit in the beginning, just so that new players don't have to go like directly into Heart of Darkness out the gate. So that's kind of where all these kind of this dystopic energy comes from, because the utopic energy is like, okay, if there's so much utopia here, what should we then do? What is the problem for the players to solve? And I think we started to realize more and more the world and these concepts, this deregulation of violence and all that, are the elements of the players to go and figure these things out in collaboration with others and cooperation and in competition.
It's interesting that you're describing this concept of a nation state, because blockchain, especially in the context of something like Bitcoin, is an effort to essentially separate the money from the state. And that open source software is actually a way of abdicating the monopoly on violence, right, that exists in the state context. So, I definitely feel that you're onto something. And I think this does take the game in sort of the blockchain direction. We'll get to that quite a bit later, but I really do feel like this idea of open source is really unilateral disarmament. So it's really that someone gives up their right to coercive power over the user of the software, right? And I think that this tendency of open source software is absolutely related to what you're describing, which is essentially this terrestrial monopoly on violence that is exerted by the state. So, I think it's a very important theme. I do think that it's really interesting to see it emerge in the context of EVE Online, this sort of space conquest, especially in this kind of hyper capitalistic and cruel world. So, I think that this kind of ability to check that power and maintain a balance in your world, I think, is a very poignant theme. So, thanks for that.
Yeah. This again, I mean, there are a few things that go into that soup. So, like the I think in the long story of EVE Online, there are maybe two things we absolutely were unprepared for. It was not like we were unaware. It was just like we didn't make very elaborate preparations for dealing with it. So the first thing is very soon after Eve comes out, then people have this need to start like websites around what's going on in the game, like news sites, what is happening to the game, our own developments. We turned into kind of people taking all the items of the game and making guides and sort of indexes of like all the different modules you can fit on your spaceship and all those things. And this, of course, happens around all MMOs. And but it was particularly this with the modules, where we were distributing these Excel sheets to people every time we did an update. We updated the Excel sheet with all the different, like, there were thousands of different modules, etc. in Eve. There's a lot of spaceships. There's a lot of stuff you can put in your spaceship in Eve. And then, okay, that evolved into a bit of like an API where you could query the API. And now today we have like an awesome registry of software that people have created. If you go to a GitHub called Awesome Eve, there's like a very nice inventory of all the different software that has been written to support the playing of EVE Online. And it's largely written against this mostly read-only API that we expose from our database to players to go and extend the game through their own software creations. You can technically write also, but we're very sensitive about allowing writes. It takes a lot of elaboration when it comes to allowing reads and writes through an API. It's all doable, but it's very kind of tricky to add it after the fact. So that was one. Okay, how can we better support the people which are building in and around the game? Then the other pillar was this element that MMO economies are real economies, but they do not interact with other economies. And to me, growing up in Iceland, it's very easy for me to think about like when Iceland had a closed economy versus when Iceland today has an open economy. So the Icelandic currency system, which is literally the smallest currency system in the world, is, due to its smallness, quite kind of volatile. So, and it's existed for about 100 years. For the first 80 of those years, it was under very strict currency controls. So I remember kind of, if my parents, if we were going on like a summer vacation, maybe to Denmark or to like Spain, they had to go to the bank, proving they had flight tickets to a foreign country and how long they were going to stay there. And they got the allowance of what they were allowed to change Icelandic kroners for Danish kroners or pesos at the time. And you can just imagine how much this encumbers business and population, etc., in the country. Then Iceland opens up its economy and does a lot. I mean, Iceland is a bit of a miracle story. If you look at it the last 20 years, Iceland is now number 8 on the list of like GDP per capita in the world rankings, and we've even passed all the Nordics except Norway. So it's done quite well as an open economy. So as we are dealing with the fact that EVE Online is like an economy under currency controls, we actually added a system called Plex where you can add money into the game, but you cannot take it out of the game. There's no plane ticket you can show to CCP. Look at this, I have a valid plane ticket to go and travel somewhere. Can I take a certain amount of money out, like you could in Iceland back in those days? So it's like a fully closed economy. And there are many reasons why we don't really want to change that. Just like we don't want to change the premise of the API, because it's a pretty big change, and also it's legally very complicated to implement that. So when I started to learn about blockchains, then first, okay, here is something that allows anyone in the world to upload a new smart contract into an economically adversarial environment. Like if you look at like any smart contract blockchain, all the smart contracts are in a way in a Darwinian battle with each other for attention, for liquidity, and all that. And it more or less generally works from like a technical standpoint. And it's working even more robustly and even more scalably and more securely every year that takes along. So that is very interesting. Provably sound on that front. You have to do a bit of a carve out when it comes to MEV and stuff like that, but still, largely, it functions. And MEV is probably more a function of this distributedness rather than the phenomenon itself. So that seems like a good environment to fix this collaborative software development environment. Blockchains also have carved out like a chapter in the general law and tax code of most countries, where it is somewhat much better defined what is a digital asset on a blockchain, what is a digital asset in a database of a game. It has a rather much more robust definition. Of course, people are always arguing about like, is it property, is it security, is it commodity, and store of value and medium of exchange, and like all those debates are still raging. But it does present a fairly solid environment of like, okay, if you were to make a digital economy, that digital economy could interact with other countries' economy in a way that is different than what a game economy could do. So that to me was like, okay, this might be a way to take off the currency controls of an MMO. So like the first two things that brought us to this was the smart contracts allow us basically to do a modding platform. And there we could go all the way back to mods, like the magic of being part of a mod. Once you reach like high-level wizard status, you could start and develop the mod. You can literally start to write code into the mod. Kind of like you can add contracts to a blockchain, smart contracts to a blockchain. So we can make like a server-side modding platform for a game. So that's pretty exciting. And then additionally, we gain this property. We can also open up the economy. And these two things combined together actually allow people which currently are making third-party software for EVE Online, mostly for the love of the game, which is obviously a beautiful thing, but still they have to pay for their AWS bill. They are trying to kind of supplement that with Google Ads and things like that. It's a very broken business model. So we could enable server-side modding and an open economy. These things two combined allows people to create their own business inside an MMO or a virtual world. And again, in this quest for meaning, all these things coming together has the potential to provide more meaning. Then, if that wasn't enough, then the whole decentralization, I mean, which you can almost prove through mathematics, is more resilient over time than centralization. I mean, the internet is a great example. The internet was literally invented such that there would be no single fragile point which you could just attack, and then the whole internet would be over. So to add the decentralization on top of this can really paint a path to a virtual world that not only is meaningful through this kind of open economy, server-side modding, all that, it literally could exist through only the players playing it. And that would be a fully peer-to-peer decentralized system where there's no fragile central authority that could be taken out and then the game is gone. Like, no earthly thing has to exist for the game to exist. Just through the players playing it, the game would become alive. And that actually takes me all the way back to the VRML days, where we were very much about like doing this peer-to-peer system. We didn't have the cryptography tools to make a blockchain out of it. But this kind of creates this trifecta of like smart contracts, gives you modding, open economy gives you, now you have a business model in a kind of an open way, and then decentralization has this potential to create an autonomous network of people that just through playing the game, they validate the network, it now exists, and the game is alive forever.
There's so many different concerns about this kind of blockchain gaming so-called space. And, I think one of the great things is really this motivation to make the game go on forever. Like, I feel like in some ways, the blockchain gaming industry, such as it is really just one hit game away from really being transformation to the whole gaming industry, moving us into the realm of virtual worlds, right? So, if you really look at what Herman Narula says in Virtual Societies, like, these games do reach the level of being like work. And in a sense, people go to work, and in a sense, like people go to work inside of EVE Online, and that it's actually very serious, right? Because it's, I think you said it best, like, death is a serious business, right? So, I definitely feel like it's very serious play. And if you kind of look at this sort of like motivation, I'm kind of the most excited about it because I feel like you've raised $40 million from Andreessen Horowitz, like you've had an incredibly storied career, effectively achieving like a gamer god type status, so I think it's just tremendous, right? And I think no one can accuse you of doing a money grab, right? So like the blockchain for you is about something much, much more important and significant, which to me, I think you framed beautifully, which is, when you think about a world that is cruel but fair, in some ways you're describing the blockchain as it is already. And, and I think the fairness is super important, and I think that the other dimension that's so important is this idea of forever, which is that the game goes on forever, right? So in a sense, this kind of idea of the game kind of getting into this much more transcendental space, it transcends the studio, it transcends yourself, it forms a part of your lasting legacy, and it effectively is alive as a function of, I think you said it very well, a validation by the players, right? So the players are the validators, and I think that's what I like.
I don't think anyone enjoys bugs in the core protocol of something being gameplay. Like, I, I, yeah, I don't think like there's anything really to say about that other than that just being bad. Like there's some basic level of physics, let's call it that, that you are that you're certain of. I mean, you might maybe discover more aspects of it, kind of like we do with our own physics. First, we thought it was just atoms, and then we discovered quantum mechanics, and then we discovered quantum field theory, and then maybe string theory, who knows, and all that. So, but it seems like okay, we're going deeper into like we're making more granular abstractions our world. It's not like well, sometimes it feels like we're hacking physics, but we're at least doing it on a kind of equal basis once the knowledge has been discovered. But so I think like people hacking a bridge is maybe not something I would try to make gameplay around. But what I would make gameplay around is that the world is like that. So this whole thing that your assets are kind of forever mutably there on a blockchain, I think does make sense for some parts, but in the context of game, and especially a context of meaning, where violence is not regulated, it is more that everything in this world belongs to the world physics, and you have some agency through it, but you're always bound by physics. So when you're playing eFrontier, if you join our Founder Access and start playing, you will very quickly realize that everything you own is somewhere in the world, and somebody can just track it down and steal it or destroy it, more likely. So then you will need to have somebody protect it for you, either because it's your friends or because you just hired somebody to protect it for you. And then you need some collaboration construct to be able to encode that. Hey, Miko, you're going to come here and protect my factory because I need to go to sleep. And I don't want somebody to track it down and explode it. So everything in the world belongs to the physics of the world and is subject to somebody tracking it down and destroying it. And that takes it from just being like coins on a chain to being items in a world.
There's some depth of profundity when it comes to this idea of taking responsibility. Like, I think you were talking about subject to someone tracking it down and destroying it, right? So, in a sense, it relates to meaning in the context of responsibility, right? Which is that, in a way, if you're responsible for a thing, like, it's your job to actually worry about that, and it's your job to have some anxiety about protecting that, right? So it's in a way like this, that's really just a huge idea of death having consequence, destruction, and kind of entropy, right? And it's in essence like, humans and players being agents for this kind of entropic physics, right? That they're people can act as destroyers, and then obviously there's sort of this creative destruction, right, where they can salvage the other guy's ships and then bring up their own ships, and so that kind of like hardcore PvP vibe is really tremendous. Kind of brings the conversation full circle to kind of when you were back as a kid modding on the Sinclair. It seems like you're looking at this kind of mod sphere, right, which is giving players the tools not to kind of just modify the game, but I feel like the economics of modding, it makes a platform.
Yes, I think thinking about it as a game evolutionary perspective is the correct lens. So if we go all the way back to the start of the conversation, when I was talking about the World Breaker game I was typing in on my Sinclair Spectrum, the first thing I was doing was modding that game. I was like playing around with, like make the path a little bigger. Okay, then maybe it could be conditional how the path becomes bigger. Now there's a little game loop about like making the path becoming bigger. And already I had made a game which I thought was more fun. At least it was more fun for me, probably because I modded it. But there is something about that, and then playing mods when you kind of reach creator status. Now you can go and add to the mod and modify the mod and go places in the mod you couldn't with other means. So I think this element of taking games and modifying them, has been a tremendous source of creativity in the game industry overall for a very long time. You mentioned a few of the examples of modding, but we could even take literally what you could argue through some metrics is the biggest game in the world, Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike is ultimately a mod of Half-Life, and I think that is some of the clearest example. And then, there are just so many examples of mods. So coming up with a way, and we have seen in our own game with a little API gateway we've opened up, we've had like this amazing amount of like modifications to the overall experience happen. If you could come up with a framework where thousands of people could be modding one single MMO, single sharded MMO in runtime without any downtime or code uploading and whatever, that just sounds pretty magical. And that is literally what happens on blockchains every day of the week. People are uploading some new code, and Ethereum doesn't have to go down for a downtime to import the new code or something like that. It largely just works. So creating that ability for people to mod an MMO while it's running, I mean, to me, like feels really like capturing some of that initial sort of mud energy in a very modern way. And what we have seen in our hackathons and in the kind of journey so far with Frontier definitely very much validates the sensibility of doing that.
Powerful vision for player creativity. Obviously, modding. When you look at Defense of the Ancients, Dota, right? The birth of Riot Games, League of Legends. So this kind of evolution is super powerful. I think the thing that is interesting is kind of what you were describing around digital physics, right? So I'd love to kind of understand this because I think you've been alluding to kind of entropy, and you've been kind of alluding to energy and the buildup of energy. So, I'm really curious about how you see digital physics and kind of how you see the kind of atomic nature of world building. So I just really want to understand how deep the rabbit hole goes, right? For me, a game is replayable as a function of, really a deep model. And so I think there's no question that you have a very deep model down to the physical layer.
So the way we think about it is that the game is made out of a set of rules we call digital physics. On top of digital physics, you can make digital chemistry. On top of digital chemistry, you can make like digital life, just to kind of explain kind of the following the hierarchy of sciences as we understand them. So there are certain parts of this experience where you can only compose with it. You cannot change the atomics. You can only compose them. And generally composing them requires energy, because generally you can think of life as fighting entropy with structure, and there is even a way to reason about it where life is negentropic. I encourage everyone to read the Wikipedia article about negotropy. It's a source of great inspiration. And it seems to be the purpose of life to take energy to fight entropy. And and that turns into negotropy or structure against chaos. There are many ways to reason about it. And it seems that life is constantly finding ways to harness more energy to create more structure. I mean, we can take a look at ourselves. We are harnessing power from dead dinosaurs, from the sun, or from like splitting atoms or merging them back, probably at some point in time. And this gives us more and more energy. And there's even a scale for it, Kardashev scale, on like how much energy civilization captures. So it seems to be like a leveling system. The more energy you use to create structure, the more alive you are, by some definition of it. So, and that is all done by, like, nobody's changing physics or chemistry. It's just finding new ways to compose that. So what we have come up with is like a world order where a certain part of the world order is sound, but you can extremely freely build on top of that. But most of it just like everything we as humans create, is subject to entropy. So that basically translates into anything you create, somebody can destroy it. So while the actual software might exist still, because it's on a blockchain and it exists as a smart contract, what housed it in the world, that is gone if somebody destroyed it. So that creates kind of what is canonical and what is not canonical. Well, what is canonical in this world are the things you can protect against either the entropy of the world or the entropy of other players want to go and steal your stuff.
It's definitely amazing to see kind of the depth of this model. I definitely am excited about this idea of neg entropy. I think it's really powerful in terms of the way of reasoning about sort of civilization, the expansion of life, and sort of how we structure the world, right? So in a sense, like moving towards greater and greater structure, I think it's a very powerful world model. I guess for me, the thing that I'm really curious about is kind of how do you think about kind of chaos and structure? So how do you reason about those?
So the one of the things we didn't fully, I'm not going to say think about, or at least imbue Eve with, is that there is not a lot of entropy pressure from the general environment in Eve. Most of the chaos in Eve comes from other players. Like the world itself is not really in any meaningful way out to get you. The world is challenging, the world is hard, but you can very much kind of expose yourself very sort of tentatively towards it. If you go to a wormhole, you know what you're in for. And you can largely also, even players have shown, they can master the most chaotic environments in Eve, which are wormholes. And even once we added wormholes that have a lot of entropy pressure to them from the environment, players were still shockingly quick to master it. And almost every time we add environmental chaos, that doesn't seem to be enough for the world itself to create something like, again, going back to growing up in Iceland. When you grow up in Iceland, you're very much aware you're on a volcanic island and the island is here to kill you. If it's not gale force winds in the January, it is volcanoes. If it's not volcanoes, it's earthquakes. If it's not earthquakes, it's boiling geysers. If it's not that, like take your pick. It's a drifting polar bear coming from Greenland. Like there's just like there are so many ways to die in Iceland, just from the country itself. And there's in several times we've seen stagnation set in Eve, and the world itself lacks tools to kind of shake it off almost. Generally, though, and thankfully so, we can rely on the players to shake it up. But it seems like having a mixture of both, where the world itself is angry and it wants to kill you and it will hunt you down, like very sort of almost like a bully, uh, and then that should push players even more to cooperate against that. And then we're mirroring more the conditions of life, and also mirroring more what the conditions of life in space is probably like. Space doesn't seem like a very hospitable environment for life. I mean, it's very cozy down here on planet Earth, but I've obviously not been to space, and hopefully someday I could. But certainly, if you hear from people that have gone there, it doesn't look like a very cozy place. So, like, it felt like, okay, if we impugn the world more with that property, and again, hard to retrofit into Eve. We've added it. I mean, wormholes were a good addition. I mean, you were referring a bit to the chaos era, which was a very manual like way of doing it, and nobody likes that either. Yeah, it's a very live opsy kind of way to add it. But imbuing the world with the core properties, the core physics of the world, is kind of like our core physics. You constantly need energy to fight entropy, and that's how the world is. And of course, this all needs to be balanced with some reason of just like there is a breaking point where it's just too hard. But I would say, and especially because we position the game as a survival game, and it's very much almost like a collective survival game, like surviving this chaos of the three black holes, etc. It's very much surviving against a very high entropy pressure from the world itself, from everyone within it. That should force even more, or force the winning strategy becomes even more collaboration and cooperation amongst the players.
So I'm really interested in kind of the deepest philosophical plank and what are the kind of unbreakable ethics of the game. So
Yeah,
really interested to understand like what is, because blockchain makes things immutable, and I think the core principle, something that you really won't give up on. I'm curious.
yeah. So this is something that happens. I mean, I can tell the full story since we have a bit of time. So so there is like this point where I I'm actually on paternity leave. Like my first child was born in September, and I've been obviously crunching for 3 years. So I take like paternity leave to be at home for a month, and just experience that, and obviously help out, and just be a good father. And and during that time, I I quickly find out that in the beginning, especially, there's a lot like of just everyone is sleeping, mother is sleeping, child is sleeping. I'm here. I need to be ready. Something comes up, but I'm kind of twiddling my thumbs, and I'm like, okay, maybe I should go and play online since I have time on my hand. And then I like start playing online, and I'm like, oh my god, this is still broken. Oh my god, we have to fix this. And I'm like writing down lists of things that need to be fixed, and like typing them up and sending it to the team. And I'm like, oh, Hilmar, like this is this is not what you should be doing. You're literally just working now. And then I go, okay, maybe I go and play some other game. And I'm like, go play Neverwinter Nights, which
Good
was
one.
kind of fun for a while. And it was like, okay, I really should go back and see like if I can play EVE Online without turning into a quality assurance. And I go play Eve. I roll a new character and playing, and I have all these invites to join corporation, and I was like, okay, how do I do that? I'm thinking. I mean, what if they ask me what I do and things, and what would I really say? We didn't really have any process or protocol of like what it meant to be as a dev playing the game. But like I at some point just like click accept on one of them, and this is like a sort of an empire mining corporation, and so to explain that a bit, so in EVE Online there are these security statuses. So you can be in security zone 1.0, where actually there is a bit of monopoly on violence, mainly in the form of NPC police that intervenes if you're doing something in the game against kind of the yeah, kind of against protocol. And then it goes to kind of low sec, and then to 0.0 or null sec, where anything goes. And the idea generally was people start in the high security zone. They built up infrastructure, and then they push out and clean up the outer regions and settle them and start to make their own violence monopoly machines, which very much has happened. So, but this little mining corp was mainly people from the UK, and they were kind of just peaceful corporation in high security space mining to get everyone in kind of bigger spaceships. So I joined them, and they are going on these mining operations, and I learned a lot about the experience of doing the mining, and I'm there just mining with them. I have like a little spaceship called a Tristan. Some people have a Thorax, and some people have a Dominix, which is kind of a battleship. This is all very galante heavy. It was a certain race in online, and everyone was kind of about that. So it was kind of okay. First mission is to get everyone into a battleship, a Megatron or a Dominix, and I'm there just happily mining away, and they're all like they start by ejecting a can, and then use the can to mine into the can, and then somebody comes on a freighter to take out of the can. And this feature of ejecting a can is actually at some point I did request this feature to be added to the game to like Matti, who was like he was doing as I was making kind of the 3D engine and all that stuff. He was doing a lot of the what we call inventory system. And so it was easy for him to add like a debugging feature. I was like, I need to be able to eject this on easily just in the game to kind of test out things in the graphics and things like that. So, and this test container, which was never supposed to ship with the game, but the code was never, yeah, it was accidental. It was very big, like it was much bigger than a spaceship. I think it was like 27,000 cubic meters or something silly like that. And and um, and everything in the game was about the size of your cargo hold of your ship, the amount you could mine per hour or per minute into the cargo hold, and then you would have to travel back to the space station. And we had calculated like what it meant to kind of if there were so many players, they were doing so much mining, that is so much traveling. So we had like a formula to explain. Okay, if there are 100,000 players playing the game, this is the content progression of like somebody will have a battleship in 3 years, something like that. And as we were doing this, I was like, oh my god, they they will ruin the content progression by doing this. And I later found out that everyone was doing this, as this has been the state of affairs. We just had been someone clueless. Yeah, just trying to fix the servers, which were very broken in the beginning. So, I mean, we lost some of the actual things happening inside the game when we were crunching away on that. And so I'm kind of discovering some of this after the fact, connecting the dots. Some of the team knew, but none in the team knew kind of all of the things, what the consequences of those were. So I'm like, oh my God, these deeper containers are ruining the content progression. There are people that have battleships already. Was supposed to be years ago. All the content progression of the game is ruined. Everything is ruined. We have to fix this. And then as I'm experiencing this, then it's like, maybe we shouldn't be fixing this. This actually is a very better way to do mining, because as the container is there in space, it's kind of exposed. Anyone can really go and steal from the container. So it's kind of like now there are assets on field, so to speak, that are vulnerable. And then also you have to trust a lot the guy who's doing the hauling, because the person doing the hauling could just like, yeah, it could just steal it. So I like unsent the email before it goes any further of taking out this. And it's like, okay, it's not like we're gonna kind of take this out. This has been going for now like 3-4 months, and it's just like now we have to deal with it. So I'm there, okay, after having had that little nervous breakdown about like the whole design of the game being broken due to basically what is player invention. Then I turned to my brain to, okay, I need to contribute to this group faster. I just have a little frigate, and at some point, like one of the corp mates is kind of is like, okay, I need to leave. Have a good rest of mining operation or something like that. And I'm like, whoa, wait. What if I borrow your Thorax while you're offline, and then I can contribute to the group more instead of using my little Tristan. And then he goes like, okay, sure, but you have to follow me here. I need to drop off some stuff somewhere far away, and I go and follow him somewhere. Okay, we kind of do the exchange. I give him my Tristan, he gives me his Thorax, and I'm like, yay, I have a Thorax. I'm not going to go and mine more. And then I need to go back to where we were mining. So I put like a autopilot path there, and then I go to the toilet. And when I come back from the toilet, then I see the pod, like when your ship is destroyed in Eve, there's like an escape pod that contains your
Oh my
character.
God.
And I mean, it's a kind of a neat little object. I've often used it for like graphics debugging and things like that. So I'd often seen the pod, but I had never seen the pod as the pod. So as I see the pod on the screen, and I'm like standing a little bit, sort of, I'm walking into the room and I see the pod on the screen. I'm having this kind of like, my brain is kind of reacting to what I'm seeing. Oh my God, it's the pod. Okay, why is that? Well, I didn't check the autopilot path. Oh, I was probably gate camped. Oh my God, I just lost the shit I just borrowed from a friend while on the toilet. I'm like I lost so bad in my own game. Talk about like death being a serious matter and loss and whatever. And I'm like, and then like, wait a minute, I'm the CTO. I can just go and make a new spaceship. And then I become like immediately disappointed in myself for like cheating in my own game, or in this game. And I'm like, now I'm like disappointed in myself in thinking that. And then I'm like, wow, what does it feel so deeply as cheating doing that? And then there's something about like, okay, it's gonna be an imposter spaceship. It's not a real spaceship. Because it wasn't mined out of real materials. Like it's not a meaningful spaceship. And I'm just like all these things are rushing in front of my eyes. Just watching the ship blinking. This is like having like a car crash. And like, oh my God, this is like time dilation. Like I'm solving universal field equations in my brain, trying to figure out what's going on. So, but that becomes very simple at some point. Well, I guess what the paternity leave now is about. It's about mining all those minerals to pay back my friend his lost thorax, and then catch up to the rest of the corp mates to get everyone into a Dominic's. So yeah, that was kind of like, and I very much, I can almost like go back to this moment. It was so profound, and it kind of almost felt like I don't, like a test from the universe of Eve or something. Yeah, and I'm like, okay, how meaningful is it really, Hilmar? Well, it's this meaningful. I will not cheat my way out of that. And at some point, it's very silly. Actually, at some point, I'm back at work and I'm still mining while at work, and I have this weird conundrum: should I be mining or should I be fixing bugs in the game? Like, which is more meaningful to the game? Like mining to pay back my in-game friend, or fixing bugs so that the game is less buggy? And it was a very weird dichotomy of like, okay, here are two types of work I could be doing. I could be mining space rocks to repay my debt of honor to my friend, or I could be doing software work to fix bug in the game that is also paying back to my friend. Like, which is more meaningful?
Yeah. So
There was no clear answer.
well, so this reminds me of a story from Homer. So Homer is well, he was a bear for meaning, and one of the things he did was separate the immortals from the mortals. The Olympians, right? The gods, right, are immortal, right? And the mortals. But the thing that's crazy is that the land of the mortals is always a tragedy. The immortal land is always a comedy, right? And so, but the gods struggle because they have struggle with meaning. Because if there's no death, as you have in your game, death is a serious business. But then if it's just a comedy and everyone's laughing all the time, there's nothing meaningful happening on Olympus. And so there's a tremendous scene in the Iliad where essentially uh, Zeus's son Sarpedon is actually being killed. He's about to be killed in the Troy on the battlefield, and Zeus is getting his armor, his shield, his aegis, and he's going down there to protect his son. And Hera grabs his arm and says, "You can't do it." And she says, "Look, if you go down and defend your son, then every Olympian god will defend every one of their favorites. And in fact, the land of the mortals, which is the only island of meaning in the universe, will be ruined because it will just be the mortals will become the playthings of the gods and all the meaning will bleed out and there'll be nothing left, right?" So, Hera basically says, you cannot do this. You can't perform this godlike action and basically cheat in this game that has so much meaning, right? So this is really kind of the essence of sort of this tremendous moment, right, where the god has this power but can't use it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you put it in a great context. I was unaware about the story of Zeus. I mean, obviously, I didn't like make it rain blood from the sky in the space game. It would have made me be, but the pain
Yeah.
was real for sure, and the sacrifice of like upholding the covenant of the universe was real also. Like it was not only the not using our ESP system to just spawn a new spaceship. It was also like I felt honor bound to the trust of my friend, of my space friend, which I've never
Huh.
met and never will meet, of like repaying him instead.
Yeah, it's really profound human relationships, that are transcending physical space and time. It's definitely, just far, far out. And to me, like, I really feel like you've kind of upheld the cosmic order, and I think that's really, in a way, when you look at the kingdom of like Louis the 14th, right? Like, you have Marie Antoinette saying like, let them eat cake, right? And I think that's the downfall of any empire, whether it's a space empire or the kingdom and court of Louis the 14th, right? Which is that the kings lose touch with the peasants, with the reality on the ground, right? And when you took your paternity leave, you were powerfully able to reconnect with the reality on the ground. You're like, oh my God, they're like can mining, like they're doing, oh my God, like they're ruining the game progression. It's, oh my God, like, and all of this ground level reality is really what enables the kingdom to actually continue, right? Because if the kingdom, if the king loses track of what's real and the king is no longer in touch with the citizens or subjects in the realm, then it's just a complete loss, right? So you can just trash the whole thing. So, so I really feel like it's a very powerful, experience. And in a way, like the timing is exquisite, which is that, you had this paternity leave right in the time to discover the nature of your own game.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very interesting to hear you connect with this profoundly, all the way to having like some Zeus mythology and this kind of there's a lot you're unpacking here, and it's interesting to me. So I mean, this happens to me September 2003, and I didn't really tell anyone about it. I mean, it just felt very personal, like to me, or like this is how I deeply understood what it is to live in the game, which is very hard to do generally for game developers, as per my sort of first attempt during paternity leave to play, where it just turned into a glorified QA job, and I felt like the game was like I can maybe describe it as like if you teach somebody like a card magic trick, and then they're doing it, and they're kind of doing it wrong. Like, imagine the cringe you feel when you're watching somebody kind of mess up the card trick by doing it wrong. Like, playing the game felt like that. It just like, oh, it just like, this is not how it should be. It's so half finished, and to some extent still is like that. It's maybe like 3/4 of the way finished or something. But then it became this. It didn't really matter whether the game like had bugs in it and wasn't finished. Like, this story I had in the social context of the game was deeply meaningful, and again, it helped me to not only understand it intellectually, but understand it emotionally, which are very different things. And I shared this story like when we had like a 10-year birthday celebration on Eve. I, I told this story on kind of the stage of FanFest, our sort of annual fan gathering, and it felt like, I mean, 10-year birthday, like, share some personal story about Eve that is maybe different than remember this one day when I was making the shader that did X. And there was a lot of people that came to me after that and was just very thankful that I shared the story. Well, one, sharing it, but mostly that I understood what the game was about. And I felt that so peculiar, or not peculiar. It was just impactful how much it helped people to understand that I understood. And I didn't really fully, because when you're CEO of a company, and obviously, I mean, not everything about the game has been perfect over those years. A lot has gone on. Not always been Zeus crying blood. I've been various other deity concepts. But yeah, and it was also, as we were talking about this kind of, when we were talking about the chaos era also, which is kind of like, okay, the game stagnates, it needs manual intervention to de-stagnate, but that intervention becomes very anthropomorphic through me, because the agency of dislodging stagnation is, we don't really have a good process either embedded in the physics of the game or embedded in the physics of the organization even. And at that particular period of time, we also needed to do a lot of work on just how we do work on EVE Online after, like, in that case, like almost over 15 years of making it. So, yeah, so there are, I mean, I think you can observe the back solve of many of these things leading to imbuing frontiers with these kind of mechanisms where the world can be even more autonomous and even kind of live its own life, and it doesn't need like agency from outside itself to kind of help it stay true to form.
Yeah, I'm really curious about, really understanding kind of how you look at the mythology within the game, right? So, you've used Shiva and Kali for inspiration. There's, I don't know how much Nordic or Icelandic experiences are baked into Eve. It's very interesting from a symbolism perspective. Obviously, Eve herself is, the first, one of the first humans, certainly, and obviously, New Eden as the name of the land or territory is clearly a biblical reference. So, I'd love to kind of understand how you look at sort of the mythology, how you look at kind of the gods, and how you understand the kind of spiritual dimension of the game.
It is very much deeply encoded in this in the human experience to reason about moves in the sky. So you can just imagine, okay, we're Homo sapiens, 300,000 years ago, we seem to be reasoning a lot about the sky, about the stars, about the planets, about comets, about the sun, about the precession of the sun, and we go further and further back, and there seems to be no end other than just what stays against entropy. How sophisticated the knowledge of humans very far back is around the things moving in the sky. And I even have my own pet theory that most of poetry is something about stuff in the sky, and you were talking about like Greek mythology. A lot of the gods are named after planetary bodies, and the planetary body is named after them. So there's a lot about like things in the sky, either living in the sky, being the sky. A lot of math is invented by reasoning about things in the sky. I think first it started as poetry about movements in the sky, and poetry over time became math. Like poetry is almost like an embedding grammar to have information travel through time and reason about things, like either ethical things or environmental things, but encode information into a bound form that can travel through time. And then I think that progresses into math. Most of math in the beginning is about movements of things in the sky. So I think there's this deep connection with science, religion, etc., and things in the sky. So it just seemed like a natural way to kind of take to some extent mythology and have that be encoded into the world, like Eve in New Eden, kind of Eve, also Eve Online. It's an evening online. It's the mother of mankind. It's like there's a lot of play on that. New Eden, Second Genesis. The game was actually called Eve, the Second Genesis, because there, in the backstory, there's like people find a wormhole, they go through it, the wormhole closes, they kind of get lost, kind of in the hairdressers in the spaceship in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, kind of infrastructure crumbles, and then it kind of rises again, and you find mankind on the kind of second genesis of space travel. So the a lot of the early expansion code names were like Shiva and Kali. There's a lot of kind of yeah, yeah. I mean, the worst like I don't know. There's something about Hinduism. If you're doing world design, that is some of the trippiest stuff you will read about like any religion, and 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 there was a lot of like kind of yeah. It's a juicy territory to kind of for world creation. So yeah, I mean the first expansion of EVE Online was called Shiva. It actually became a marketing name called Exodus, but the one to follow was Kali, and there was a Vishnu there somewhere. So I mean, there was just a lot of kind of pulling all this sort of mythology about the sky. So when you were telling this story about Zeus and his preventing the death of his son, like there's I mean, it all kind of lives in the same sort of domain, I think.
Yeah, as I was kind of hearing about your concept of movement in the sky, like it really makes me think about uh, Sun Tzu, who really talked about he talked about the general. So the most common translation has to do with the general who understands the terrain and the weather. But when you actually look at the Chinese characters, it's really the terrain becomes the earth, right? And the weather, it's not actually even weather. It's actually Tian, which is the realm of the celestials, right? Which is really heaven, right? So in a sense, like Sun Tzu is talking about heaven and earth, not about
Mm.
the weather and the terrain, right? And so in a sense, the heaven and earth becomes kind of the top down view and the bottom up view, right? Which is the strategic view and the tactical view, right? The cosmic view and the individual view, right? So all of these kinds of powerful dichotomies are sort of embodied within this idea of like Tian, which is the sort of realm of the unmanifest, right? The
Mm.
heavenly and cosmic, universal, unbounded, unlimited, formless, right? And then obviously in stark contrast to this concept of the earth, right? Which is all about the manifest, the conditioned, the limited, the kind of world of manifest creation, which is subject to different laws, right? So I think to me, like that is really about kind of this connection that you're describing earlier, right? Because when you think about the immortals and the mortals, right, and you think about kind of the gods and the humans, right, these kind of dichotomies express themselves really as these sort of polar opposites, right? So to me, like the greatest irony is sort of someone who's sort of a game world or universe creator living inside of and being trapped by your own creation, right? So that it's truly like this kind of incredible irony.
Yeah. So I was thinking a bit when you were saying Tian. Um, is there a Chinese word or that would be Tian Hao? Would that make sense? Do you know?
Mm.
Tian Hao. No, just like Han Hao, Tian Hao. Would that what would that be in Chinese? Maybe somebody will explain it to us. No, going back to your question of Nordic. So I would say no, like not in a literal, as we would call them today, signifier sense. You won't find common signifiers in Eve from there. Like when you grow up, like with all these mythology, etc., it becomes a little cringe when you try to make it in a literal sense. You can trace quite a bit of what Eve is, and you can imagine the people that settled Iceland. They literally sailed into the starry night and found riches in the form of another country. So imagine you're on a little boat in the black darkness of night. You look at the sky, and the sky is, let's imagine the sea is calm for one moment. The North Atlantic is calm. Cool story, bro. Like, but imagine that. Like, it's like a black night, starry night. It's no wind. It's a clear sea. That is as close to being in space as you could be. So that is very much reflected in the game, and it is literally a ship. You're literally in a ship, and actually the differential equation set we have in EVE Online is called balls in a viscous fluid. So you literally are in a ball navigating through a fluid when you're playing EVE Online. EVE Online is actually a space submarine game. Like the physics is that of a submarine. So so the people that found Iceland, they found Iceland through this method of like some people in Norway didn't want to be in Norway anymore, and they went to Iceland. And all the way, or at least during the nights of that way, they were sailing in the starry night. So you can find traces like that in the game for sure. Then what we hear from people which come to Iceland often for FanFest, they claim that Iceland looks a lot like EVE Online. Like I can't see it, but yeah, it's like I'm just too close to it. It never really made any sense to me. But there is something about the vastness, the lava fields, the harshness, the something about how Icelandic people are. So I think the game is deeply Icelandic without using Icelandic signifiers, except obviously ISK as the currency symbol.
Yeah,
But
interstellar credits. Yeah. So, one of the things that I think you have said is that the original EVE Online is like Rome, right? And that the EVE Frontiers, which is the blockchain version or expansion, the new game, is actually more like New York. So, to me,
yeah,
this is really interesting.
yeah. So okay, when we were thinking about this, are we doing this radical change on Eve, where we're gonna do a new way to mod the game, we're gonna open up the economy, we're gonna do all these things, and I think there was something about that was just too radical, like and and nobody was really kind of in a way asking for it. Like at some point, the construct of the game becomes a fairly kind of settled concept in people's minds. And then it's good to think of something that is beautiful and still quite settled. And I think Rome is an extremely good example of that. Like Rome is obviously a major historical city that still exists today and is a beautiful city, very vibrant city, and it's a very cool place to visit. It's a cool place to live in, and it's been like that for thousands of years, obviously with ups and downs, but it certainly is in a in a it's a very beautiful thing, and it's a mixture of traditional and modern and like it's yeah it's a lot, and and just because you have new technology available, let's call them like skyscrapers, it doesn't necessarily mean you go and bulldoze Rome and make space for skyscrapers. It just like let Rome be Rome. And then I thought about, okay, what if we just, and I often think of the meta sort of place of like what is our agency in like developing Eve, and it always feels like we're like the city government or like the city janitors, like feels like city janitors is like a good sort of mental paradigm to think about ourselves. We're like city planners slash janitors. Often when you think of like a president or a king or whatever, it doesn't fit this model of like it's a sandbox. We don't have monopoly on violence. It's given to everyone within it. So, so like thinking of a city, and then okay, what if we were to think of like a new city? And then, I mean, my mind went to kind of New York. So, I mean, Rome, New York. Also, what I like about it is that there's a there's a bit of like I don't know, it's a bit of an Italian vibe when you're in New York. Like, it has a bit of that, at least in my brain. It feels a bit Italian for some reason. Probably, and there were obviously a lot of Italians that came there, obviously, along with a lot of different people. So I think of Frontier as like, okay, here's Rome, and now we're building New York. And I often like think of like which Daniel Day Lewis movie are we in? Are we in the Last Mohican? Are we in There Will Be Blood? Or are we in Gangs of New York? Or somewhere along that spectrum. Right now in Thorax, we're in like the Last Mohican for sure. We're trying to get to like There Will Be Blood. Probably when we can call it, we're now in the There Will Be Blood phase. Then we exit Thunder Access, and then at some point it's going to be Gangs of New York. So we're somewhere in that journey of building New York, and we're recruiting people from all over. Some like coming back from the distant history of Eve, and like all sorts of people which are curious in this grand experiment of ours to join it. So the way we think of like, okay, it is a place in the grander universe of Eve, maybe not even in the same galaxy. It is still, it is on the same timeline. Um, and there actually are echoes which have happened, and it's in some of the backstory lore. If you go to our website, the the way like the last awakening that was triggered has information, so people on the frontier are aware of EVE Online, or are aware of New Eden through the stillness, which is a complicated physics, science fiction we've come up with, where there were like echoes from New Eden that were traveled through the stillness through the people of Frontier. So the people of Frontier have some idea, in not a very specific way, but they have this idea there's this grand human culture somewhere coexisting somewhere. They don't know where, don't know where it came from. It came through the stillness. And they have a very romanticized way of like what is going on, because like New Eden really is an Eden in many ways, even if it's dystopic and capitalistic and all that. But it's a world where like trillions of people live, and it's rich with culture and history and human achievement, poetry, culture, fashion. It's a bustling space opera of like a lot of like pinnacle of human creativity, also pinnacle of human destruction. Whereas the frontier is not like that. It is hellish. It doesn't want you to live.
Huh.
No life is there. It's mechanical at best, and it's a hellscape, and it doesn't have that. So that is this kind of echo that is a bit in the interplay. I don't know exactly where it's going to take us, because obviously the players playing the frontier know about New Eden. A lot of them have lived in New Eden. Now they're living there in frontier, and we wanted to emphasize a bit that the players playing frontier know more about New Eden than the rest of eFrontier, because that doesn't fully know. So we came up with this echo, and sort of we came up with this way. So it's like many in the team are from kind of the sort of Soviet Union and affiliates, and they were sort of describing to us what it was getting like music and VHS tapes from the West in that era, and the obviously communication was very different back in those days, but how these kind of packets of culture traveled, and they were very like encoded in, maybe not like directly in messages, but a lot of culture you create is about like your culture in some sense, and particularly in the 80s. 80s culture is a very kind of extreme version of Western culture. So, like we thought about it a little bit like that also. Like there's some awareness of this on the frontier, but it's very much in an echo, and it's not very fully understood, but it seems very utopic to them. And that almost becomes like an archetype of like what wants to exist on the frontier, kind of in the way that New York came to be as some version of Rome, because the idea of what a city is was very much laid down by Rome and replicated by New York in a very different way, obviously. So, so this is kind of the layers and layers of, and there's more to this rabbit hole. Some of it's we've kind of thought through, but not really published, because often it's better just to see what people come up with and run with that rather than what we came up with. Once you've put out all the sort of the seeds, that is literally how this becomes canon, so to speak. But we put out these seeds, and I'm probably saying a little too much right now, but But if people have gone deep into our lore section, they might be nodding right now or saying aha. I ideally nodding and not saying aha. I might be spilling the tea a bit too much.
That's what we're here for. So, really interested in, this kind of survivalistic aspect. I really do feel like there's a social aspect, right? So, I don't know, like one of the games that has a really deep world model, highly kind of multidimensionally interactive is RimWorld. So, I'm a big repeat player of RimWorld. Obviously, there's all kinds of really interesting kind of survival based building genre games, things like Rust, Valheim, the whole stack. I think Factorio probably, features much more kind of automation, a little less psychology, a little less culture, but really kind of has this wild hyperscale creativity, kind of Minecraftian vibes as well. So, I guess I'm really interested in kind of these sort of distinct game feel identities. And I'm really interested in getting at your perspective on kind of like the base survival genre. Like, how do you see kind of the New York expansion and the Rome, base game? Like, how do these fit together? Obviously, Eve, the original game, over time has accreted a lot of complexity and is maybe not as approachable. Do you see this kind of new New York game, the frontiers, as being more approachable inherently? So, I really just want to try to understand how you see sort of how these two things, really build their own distinct game cultures, their distinct audiences, or maybe not. Maybe that the single player plays both or all games. So, I'm just trying to reason about how these things fit together.
So it's interesting, like in this focus of making it feel more like a survival game than an MMO in the kind of era that Eve comes from. It's less like a Ultima EverQuest, and it's more like a Rust. Just to often people reference Rust when they talk about the feeling of playing Frontier. Yeah, and there is something about the clarity of survival. The often the challenge when you join EVE Online, there is so much in EVE Online to do and potentially to do. And because it's this large world, very space opera like, and it's like bustling with stuff, and you can do a lot of different things. Then when you start playing EVE Online, it 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 is not very clear about what it wants you to to experience emotionally when you're playing it. Like it's maybe very clear in the tutorial, is giving you clear tasks and things like that, but it is less clear about what it is that you are and what you're doing. I mean, it's kind of like logically understood. You have a small spaceship, you want a big one, and you get a bigger spaceship by either earning money or mining minerals to make a bigger one. I mean, logically it's understood, but but the but your own emotional situation is not very well defined. Whereas in a survival experience, it's a lot more defined. Like if you don't do this, you die. And okay, like immediately clear, like what I should be doing. Okay, and okay. So number one, I should not run out of fuel. Okay, noted. Number two, I should build a little kind of space hut slash village for myself. Like immediately, these things just give you very clear emotional clarity about what it is that you should do. And and I'm pretty sure if you were to kind of be born in Rome, well, maybe not born, if you were to move to Rome in some era, or even today, I mean, you could do so many things. I mean, there's so much to do in Rome. If you join New York in the Daniel Day-Lewis era, I think it's very clear you're there to survive. and and it might be way more hardcore to survive, but it's very emotionally clear what the the anthropic pressure of like you're gonna die gives a lot of clarity, and what we have found, this clarity in the beginning does help a lot with new player onboarding. I've heard that from a lot of people, even at CCP, where they just like there's like a little bulb that goes off just when you've stripped the game so much down and it just becomes about this. It is so much more engaging to do, and I think that also kind of puts a bit of a lens on how we can also evolve kind of the entry and Eve, try to find this way of, I'm just going to call it emotional clarity as a straw man on how to frame it. But I don't really have a clear answer on that right now. I'm just too involved in 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 the kind of reality of not here right now. I'd rather figure that out well before I make some grand hypothesis about like how that can give us a different lens on Eve. I think also it will largely just come through people expressing it in different ways to us, the kind of delta and the difference, what it feels to live in its city, so to speak. Weirdly, making the game more hardcore helps with new player onboarding.
So, in terms of the whole metaphor of the New York and Rome, I think one of the things that people have been critical of more recently is actually the complexity of and approachability of the original EVE Online. So, I think as the game has gotten richer and richer, obviously, the accessibility has been a complexity, right? And obviously, having this new world, I think, is going to be a substantial benefit, and I do
Yep.
think that the harshness of both worlds kind of gives you that incredible consistency of game. So I think that that's a really cool thing, right? But I think that obviously, to me, with a clean slate, you can have something that is sort of fits the ethos of the kind of harsh survivalism, like this really extreme condition, but at the same time, maybe be a lot more approachable. Um, yeah, so something where the users can get into the game much more quickly. I think the direction of something like a survival based building imperative, individual survival is very kind of focusing, so I definitely appreciate what you've done there. But I guess to me, I'm really curious what your perspective is on I guess I hate to call it the old game. I think
Yep.
the classic EVE Online is something that
Yep.
you should be proud of, and that that's a very big achievement in gaming, right? So I guess the question really becomes, how do you look at the split? How do you look at the different player bases? How do people I don't know, segment themselves? I mean, are there people who are playing both at the same time? Or what is kind of the mindset, right? Because it's it's a complex milieu, especially as you introduce this new layer. Definitely super excited to play the new game. I think obviously I think that cleanliness and the redesign aspect and the kind of creating a tale of two cities, as to quote Dickens, I really think that would be a very powerful paradigm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the actual nuanced story when you do join EVE Online and you do join a corporation is actually quite different. But I, yeah, I, I just keep hearing beautiful stories of people joining EVE Online, playing for a few months, flying to Iceland, and meeting the devs at FanFest. It just because we just had FanFest last month, and it's just so often I hear like beautiful stories of people just recently started playing EVE Online and just wish they had the time machine and had gone and do it sooner. It's like best way, best time to join EVE Online was 20 years ago or yesterday. Like that really is true. But there is something about the general framing and the general reputation of it, where when we say Frontier is more of a space survival game in the style of Rust, Rimworld, even a bit of Factorio, Satisfactory, like Now we're talking a lot more sort of spice to the soup. um, that evokes a different idea of what you're going to be doing, than in the kind of grand space MMORPG
Mm.
opera kind of historic and legendary. It is just two very different things. Again, like how Rome and New York are two different
Mm.
places. And there is something beautiful about the differentiation of it. Like, here are two space games from the same company, kind of built on largely the same engine, but they are very different in how emotionally they manifest. So
Mm.
I am more and more, as we go kind of more decisively towards the vision of Frontier. It's taken, and it takes quite a lot to manifest this game into reality. But the update we did just last week already like is leaps and bounds over what we have been showing before. And I mean, I just feel it when I play it myself. It is just like, it is, while I understand everything about it, it's the spaceships, the physics, the graphics engine, the servers, etc. It just feels very different, like in a good to be different kind of a way. I'm not confused. Am I playing Eve or am I playing Frontier? They're quite different experiences.
Hmm. I'm definitely excited to check it out. I think it's a really amazing opportunity, actually, right? Because I feel like what you've been able to do over time is, I think there's two things, right? Obviously, one of them has to do with evolution and really things like the erasure of technical debt, right? Because you're really dealing with kind of exceedingly modern platforms. You're dealing with kind of a completely new, clean slate. And obviously, you have like tremendous learnings about kind of player behavior, so in a sense this kind of reset gives you a huge opportunity to sort of redesign, right? Redesign on first principles, obviously, as a much more kind of established and senior game designer, so this to me, I think represents kind of a really big potential, and so I love this kind of thing because it's not been tried before. I think one of the things that I'm a little critical of is, if you look at the way that something like World of Warcraft expanded, it largely did so through these expansions that created essentially inflation, and it's complex.
Yeah. So I mean, to again, this kind of, okay, taking our ship, sailing out of Norway in the starry sky. It's kind of step one. Now you're sailing in a ship in literally the starry sky, in the literal sky. You are Tian Ren, would be the Chinese word for it, I guess. Sky people. Um,
Mm.
and what is that Chinese word for ship? Tian, ship Ren. Whatever. I'm in a very long quest to learn more Chinese, to speak to our Chinese office. It's not going great, like, but still, uh, slowly it percolates in. Um, and then, okay, we're in the literal starry night, and we're going somewhere. And the reason why we've come up with this, the three black holes, which are kind of locked in a dance macabre of some absolute madness. It's both a three-body problem and quantum mechanical general relativity problem. It's like problems on top of problems compounded. And as we were talking to our astrophysicist on the team about, like, okay, the math of black holes and how to make a black hole and all that, and then we're sort of fabulating, okay, but if we have two black holes, well, I mean, nobody really knows what like two black holes would be, but there is some extrapolatory math that does it. But what if there are three? Then it was like, okay, now all bets are off. Like, it's impossible to understand what happens around three black holes, let alone kind of three black holes locked in a three-body problem kind of setup. So, okay, that seems like a good alibi to like go off the map if there exists no scientific understanding of what happens around three black holes. Then we have kind of a great alibi for what we have happen in that sort of domain. So, So what you can explore is a lot of that. You are now literally not in Kansas anymore, and nobody really knows how deep the rabbit hole goes. So, like a true frontier. And it is a true frontier in the sense that there are amazing riches on this frontier in the form of
Mm.
in the form of kind of rifts in fabric of space, which you can kind of open by adding negative energy to it, kind of turning it into
Wow.
a bit of a black wormhole. And actually, we found out kind of that there is actually a way to make a negative energy. Like there is a concept called squeezed light, which which is a form of taking
Mm.
lens and putting a laser through it that actually can make negative energy. I was kind of blown away when I learned about this, that it's just negative energy. So yeah, so I mean, negative energy is a physical phenomenon in the context of just it's a remainder of equations, largely around wormholes and black holes and those kind of things. You're really pushing my ability to explain this right now, but I mean, we're what 2 hours into it. If somebody has made it this far, like please forgive my ways of talking about it. But negative energy was largely this concept that is like how you make an Einstein-Rosen bridge is by using negative energy to kind of make a tunnel through space. Because there is like a factor that is a reminder in the equations, and the factor is negative, and that is basically negative energy. That's how it came to be. You needed to make the math work. But it just turns out you can actually
Mm.
just make it also. So the yeah by by making squeeze light, you can make negative energy. Anyway, we use that mechanic to kind of turn that into taking these rifts or these fissures and turning them into rifts, and out of that comes something which is called crude matter. And it's called crude matter because people don't really know how to explain it, but it is otherworldly. And it comes from somewhere. Like there are different theories on the frontier exactly where it comes from. Is it from another world? Is it from another time? I mean, nobody fully understands it, but it has extreme powers when refined
Mm.
and combined with normal matter. So you can make materials, you can make energy, you can make all sorts of things with this. And as you get closer to the three black holes, more and more of these fissures are there. There's different types or like almost like quality of fissures, which you can open up to rifts, and different kind of crude matter comes out. So, so people have been trying to make stable colonies around the black holes, but there's so much entropy pressures from the black holes that they kind of destroy the colonies quite often. Yes, and we've been going through these phases and cycles now in the founder access, which kind of mimic this phenomenon. There's an entity called the keeper who's kind of keeping the knowledge, and it's kind of like mechanical life survives better than biological life. So there's a lot of sort of automation, kind of like machine automation that has been tinkering on itself for tens of thousands of years. Nobody really knows how long. So there are all these kind of different machinations that just exist there, kind of like a machine life. If you watch our Vision trailer we released last week, you can see swarms of them, and you can see kind of the tone of the whole world. So how much has been going on with this machine life is one of the mysteries. Uh, there's also ruins for failed attempts at colonizing the frontier. So you can also see in the trailer, you see these kind of colossal space structures from sort of a gone by era, which has been maybe taken over by machine life
Yeah.
and recomposed into something, and God knows what is lurking in the dark, as we say in the Envision trailer. So there's just like a ton of mysterious stuff that constantly kind of should keep the world mysterious, and the fact there's so much chaos and there is so much entropy and destruction that it's going to take a lot to map
Yeah.
out all the environment. It's also stupidly big. It might be too big. We have run simulations up to 120,000 solar systems, which is just an absurd number to be making that many solar systems. Even something like 8,000 solar systems as
Mm.
a comparison. Uh, and that world is just too big. It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, the mind boggles. But if you look at our own universe is just, it's comically big. Like, it is absurdly big to a point of comedy. I mean, it just does. It's like, what the actual fuck? Like, what is all this? What is all this needed for? But it does give you a sense of like grandeur of just, wow, okay, we ain't literally ain't seen nothing yet. And while we can't go for like trillions of galaxies with billions of suns in them and God knows what, then at least we wanted to push the boundaries to our own version of absurdity. And I mean, currently the biggest world we've generated is 120,000 systems. Of course, there will be some kind of physics around what makes sense to travel in and what's accessible, and most of the stargates will need to be built or rebuilt because a lot of them are broken and ruined. But this kind of sort of invitation of come to this space survival horror game to rebuild a broken world, where part of the rebuilding is literally programming it, or taking code from somebody that has programmed it and make use of it. That is kind of like, you make the challenge great and you give great tools to kind of overcome the challenge.
Yeah, so really interesting about I think you have this new Eden, you have this kind of rifts, and you have the triple black holes, the frontier, this kind of craziness, obviously EVE Online, so I guess the question becomes about this sense of Eden itself and how the biblical Eden, and how does that tie into the sort of deeper mythology of the game? Obviously, Eve it took the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? So, obviously, and was sort of henceforth summarily cast out of Eden, into the land of Nod, east
Yes.
of Eden, right? So, I guess the big kind of mythological construct kind of has to do with sort of how degenerate we how fallen we are as humans,
Yes.
and how we sort of were banished, right, from this kind of idyllic state into this more, I guess, chaotic state. So um yeah, curious about
Well,
what is your take on Eve herself, given Eve Online?
so is it maybe bad that Eve took the apple? So the we were talking about a few hours back. We were talking about this utopia dystopia. I mean, maybe Eden was just boring. Like all this kind of being in a pet zoo made by God was just boring. So maybe, and most probably, Eve did us all a big favor by taking the apple. So yeah, I think the jury is out on that. And it's a bit. I mean, you're though kind of correctly picking up on the vibes, like whether people should be adding net negative energy to these fissures to turn them into rifts to get crude matter. That is probably a bad idea. Like there probably is consequence. Like It seems morally hazardous at best to be doing it.
So this is very reminiscent for me about the Mormon retelling of the essentially the tale of Lucifer, and really it has to, in some ways Lucifer in this telling. It's told to me by a friend of mine who's a Mormon, but in this retelling, Lucifer is essentially he's a very good thinker, right? And so essentially, they're in heaven and Jesus and Heavenly Father are like talking about the plan, right? And the plan is that you give humans free will, right? And then what happens is the humans commit sin as they do because they're horrible, right? And then what happens is someone needs to absolve them. And so Jesus has to go down to earth and be crucified, right? That's the plan, right?
Mm,
That they concoct. And the thing that's wild about
mhm.
this retelling is that in this story, Lucifer actually loves Jesus, and he's the smartest guy. He's the brightest star in the sky, the morning star, right? So like he basically says, "This is unacceptable. Your plan is a trash plan, and we're not doing that. Like we're gonna do something else. Like we're gonna do my plan, which is humans don't get free will. Humans are machines and they just do only good things, and the humans never do any sin, and everything will be beautiful and it will be a perfect utopia on earth." And he's like, we're going to do it that way. And basically, because it's correct, it's mathematically superior to your way. And they disagree. And they're like, no, this is the only way. And he can't handle it because he knows that he's actually the smartest and he knows that this is the best way, and he's actually feels very kind-heartedly towards Jesus. So he flies into a rage, and he actually takes a significant chunk of the heavenly order of angels, and he takes them to hell, and he says, "Look, like I'm rebelling against the throne of heaven because this is not okay. Like you can't behave like this. This isn't good."
So, okay, I recently went again to Book of Mormons, the musical, uh, which is hilariously good. This version you're telling me now was not covered there. Like, you know. But I do appreciate this version of thinking about it, like this free will or not free will. Can't we just take away free will and everyone will be happy?
Yeah, it's nicer.
That is very much this kind of monopoly on violence kind of
Oh wow.
concept of you just take the you just take all danger away and everyone will be happy. Yeah, it just doesn't seem to work out that way. Like the
Yeah.
it just doesn't seem to work out that way. So the in at least in this version of a world, then there's very much this aspect of there is no monopoly on violence. You
Hmm.
better watch out, and you better make sure you have friends with you, because not everyone is friendly, and the nanny is not looking.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's a really profound vision, for sure.
But it's a great story. Let's just go with that. Like,
Yeah, but to me, the thing that is so challenging is kind of the
I
violence.
agree. That to me sounds profound, and now I understand Mormonism much better than, well, at least knowing both. I haven't seen the musical and heard this retelling. That seems now things make more sense overall.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's quite a deep tradition, and it's much more thoughtful. I think the musical is obviously comedic, and it's a little insulting, obviously. My friends who are Mormon, I think, are good spirited about it in the most part,
Yeah.
so they're not overly angered by it. But I do think that in a way, like um the idea of the monopoly on violence is so profound, and it kind of comes straight into the philosophy of something like Bitcoin and blockchain.
Yeah. Yeah. So the
Yeah.
it is very much the bane of, well, let's call it game development, but to some
Huh.
extent overall economy design. I think economy design is often misunderstood as how economies happen. Like,
Mm.
economies are not really a designed phenomenon. They are like, at the heart of the matter, I would think of an economy as a collaboration construct. So if we if we if we think about how economies as we know them developed, they probably came from labor specialization. Like, we probably go from being very skilled generalists with some specialization, with like, you do the running, you throw the spear, you throw the rock, you go and be a decoy, like something like that, into okay, now you make the arrowheads, you make the tail feathers, you make the bowstring, into like, okay, you sow the crop, you take care of the animals. Like, and as we became more and more specialized, we needed to be able to move the asymmetries of what was created through specialization.
Mm.
Like, making an arrowhead is a very elaborate thing, and making a feather end and a shaft for an arrow, like composing this into something, like, but how do you take an arrowhead and compose it for a lamp? Like, how does this happen? And obviously, bartering is like the first stage, but then finding a way to tokenize what you're making. How can
Mm.
you make a fractional arrowhead or fungible arrowheads, etc.?
Yeah.
And I'm using crypto terms a little bit intentionally, because they're not really, fungibility and non-fungibility are not crypto terms. These are generic property terms.
Economics. Yeah.
Yeah, they're they're probably economic concepts. I mean, there's in some sense physics concepts, but it's probably better to think about them as economic concepts in this context, at least. So, and then people invent money to kind of and make prices of things, and that becomes a coordination mechanisms. So money becomes a mechanism to coordinate the composition of this specialized labor. And then you make other coordination mechanisms, like a town or a company or a country or a city and all those things. And these start to have economies, and they're ultimately orchestrating specialized labor in solving grander problems. Like, if you imagine, like, what did it take to get somebody on the moon when we went there for the first time?
Yeah.
I
Wow.
don't know how many. There probably has, some economist has probably worked it out. Probably needed millions of people if you go all the way down to the base layer of all the little different components, all the food for all the people making all those components and all that. And it ends up with like one small step for a man and one kind of for mankind. And okay, like, his trip was a little step, but man, all the steps that led to that, putting him
Mm.
on the moon. And and there was like an elaborate coordination mechanism through economies, project management, all that. It's a beautiful thing how you can coordinate so many humans to achieve something so absurdly impossible, to
Yeah.
go to the moon without computers. Like, how is this even? I mean, we cannot do it today. But it's even to the point where, like, it's credible to be a denier of it, because it's so absurd. Like, how could somebody go to the moons in it's
Yeah.
unimaginable even today. I mean, they're always
Mm.
talking about going back, but I don't know. Is there a date yet? Is there a date yet?
Mm.
Like, is
Mm.
it that complicated with
Yeah.
like 2025 technology? You can't go to the moon, but you could do it in the 60s. And there is something about the economic construct of doing it in the 60s existed. It doesn't exist today. So that is kind of how you think about an economy. So, or how I think about an economy. I think about it as
Mm.
combination of bunch of scarce components that need to be harvested, refined, composed into something grander, usually in a topological environment, which is basically a fancy word to say a landscape. So you need to like move it around, costs energy and effort, and it needs to overcome the asymmetry, there is danger and those kind of things,
Mhm.
to compose into something bigger, and now you can wield the environment more. So this means that before you can make an economy, then first you have to create physics, then you have to create chemistry, then you have to create nature, then that nature needs to manifest on a landscape, and then once you have established that, then you have specialization to go and harvest out of that environment. And then once you have that, now you need a collaboration mechanism. Like in the case of Frontier, it's a tribe. It's like a billion DeFi protocols that anyone can bring because it's an open-ended blockchain. That can become like economic construct to finance the creation of something grand, like a new Stargate path, where now somebody can finance that because the toll fees for that new sort of Stargate path are enough to kind of write back the investment or return on investment on the return on investment on the investment of building the Stargate. Building the Stargate involves sourcing all these components, hiring somebody to protect the construction site so somebody else doesn't come and destroy it. Then you need to protect the operation as it's running. And like because all these problems exist in the world, to go and tame the chaos of the world to our bidding, thus we need all these collaboration constructs, and that largely is falls into this grouping of calling that an economy. And sometimes I feel like people are taking a bit of a shortcut and they just make the numbers go up part of the economy.
Huh.
They forget everything else I talked about. It's like, okay, I can appreciate making all the other things I talked about is very hard for there to an economy emerge on top of it, maybe, because it's also not guaranteed. It's very hard to design for emergence because you have to put a lot of faith in people figuring it out. And now after developing it for 25 years, I have a lot of faith in people figuring it out.
Yeah, that is astonishing. And, I think it relates in some ways to the fundamental inventiveness of the player base. But I think to me, this idea that you're dealing with emergence, right, is that there's a powerful co-creation. And in a way, like it feels like this foundation of a blockchain becomes really intriguing in the sense that like it kind of produces a structural advantage and it produces kind of a really high integrity system. And I think to me it harkens back to kind of your own game experience where you kind of refuse to print ships out of thin air, right, as a game publisher, right? So in a sense it's kind of like inflation pressure. Your unwillingness to participate in it gives you a lot of moral authority within the blockchain, right? Because if you think about games that just keep making power inflation, power creep, or even monetary inflation, where the weapon that you bought for $100 is now worth 10 cents because there's 10 times more powerful weapons coming, right? So like all of that kind of attitude is the same kind of an attitude as you see in sort of modern governments, and a lot of which is about kind of money printing, right? And in a sense, like, if you print money, you can look at the money that you're printing as free money, right? But it is not free money, right? Like it's diluting others. So, I think that's a principle.
Yes, yeah, like absolutely spot on. Then, in addition to that, you need to have a shift in the underlying mechanisms. As we have on planet Earth, we have the tectonic rift, which on a long time scale destroys everything. Nothing survive the the plate tectonics. It eventually just all goes down to the center of the Earth and disappears and comes out again in different form. But then you also have weather, you have like comets, like there are so many entropy forces that we have to contend with. And this again is something we are making sure we imbue Frontier a lot with those, to have those underlying entropy forces because if the world does happen to reach stagnation, and the social player, social political domain is not able to disrupt the stagnation, then there are underlying forces that are always there, sort of creeping along, that can also topple empires, but still in a way that it feels a little bit like plate tectonics and the weather. You can't fully time an earthquake, but you can measure the tension and the frequency, and you can't fully know whether it's going to rain on Tuesday or not. But we have some ways to reason about probabilities of it. So if we're going to hold a wedding on Tuesday and it's 40% chance of rain, we probably should like get a gazebo just in case. But we can also roll the dice of like maybe it's all fine. But let's not bank on it, because 40% chance of rain is too much chance of rain not to make preparation.
Yeah, so I think when you're talking about kind of metastability and stagnation, right, this is a human emergent construct that was studied by the mathematician John Nash in the form of the Nash equilibrium, right? So in a sense, like, humans tend to sort of come up with strategies and they tend to kind of couple into these Nash equilibrium, right? So like in a sense, the mathematics that I think is the most relevant to kind of this chaotic element is actually this thing
Yep.
that was called the self-organized criticality, right? Which is the work of Per Bach, and it's a chaos and complexity mathematics, very very interesting mathematics that models kind of earthquakes
Yep.
and nervous systems, stock markets, and it's really about avalanches, and it's sort of
Yep.
about the
Yep.
property of all systems towards collapse, and that in a sense the big collapse is coming, it's always coming, but
Yep.
the thing it's inevitable that the giant collapse is coming. However, the timing of the different sizes of collapses is really almost unknowable, right? It's definitely the domain of like chaos or complexity theory, right? And I think it's definitely difficult to engineer this kind of chaos, right? It's more just to understand and model the how the chaos manifests and how the entropic realm kind of ultimately unwinds the things that have been wound, right? So ultimately, when you do study avalanches, the easiest simulation is just by piling sand, so you just keep piling the sand and it gets higher and higher. But of course, and this is a computer simulation, but within that context, the sand collapses, right? So you can actually measure the size of an avalanche by this number of artificial sand, computer sand that moves, right? And it turns out when you do the simulation, you find a perfect power law distribution of avalanches, right? So there's one gigantic avalanche, and then the next one is actually about half of the size, and it keeps going onto this curve, right? So in a sense, like the mathematics of this, it's called the self-organized criticality, and there's so many natural phenomenon, including civilizations, currencies, emotional ideas like world models, stock market, avalanches, earthquakes, so many natural phenomena. So there's a lot to this.
Okay. Okay. Say again. Self-organizing criticality. No, you said.
Yes, yes, yes. Self-organized criticality. So it is in the research lore, it is complexity theory. The late great Per Bach, definitely European cast mathematician. Tremendous research work. So I'm very very excited about that kind of work because it really yields the principle of predictability, which is that the meta pattern is predictable, right? Which is we know that the earthquake is coming. Like we know destruction is coming, right? We know the big one is coming. It's like if you live in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can look at the San Andreas Fault, and everybody knows that the amount of power, the amount of energy that's held in the balance is very large, and at some point, someday, the big one is going to hit, and it's going to be a big deal, right? But like obviously, we there's no way of knowing when that is, right? And even with the small earthquakes and aftershocks, like there's no real way to model the timing of any such event, right? But I feel like getting these emergent phenomena correct, I think, is really a way of kind of avoiding the necessity for kind of human engineered chaotic elements, or to try to design into the game, because collapse is really almost in itself an emergent property of existence, right? Which is that order is, yes, comes for free, and systems do build up and up and up, but they do not perpetually go up. They go up and they come down, right? And they come down as part of the process of going up, right? So that's a inherent.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I think these maths are
yeah.
yeah, very important.
This connects, and I saw this is like a book he writes in 1999, so it's a pretty new thing in
Yeah.
mathematical sense. And I,
Yep.
because we were talking about this kind of chaos era phenomenon
Yep.
and the blowing up of the avalanches. So it's almost like a reverse of this. So if stagnation is like a self-organizing criticality in a way, like in a world like if you don't want stagnation, and critical stagnation is like a organized criticality, and then disrupting the organization of that criticality, which in this case is stabilization, which is kind of reverse of this because we're starting with plate tectonic and avalanches and weather, but there is almost like a
Yeah.
reverse of this. And now I'm thinking, like, is that like scale decoupling, where like an organized criticality in one layer could be an emergent stability in another?
Yeah, I do think that humans create these metastabilities that humans really want. So when you look at the Nash equilibrium, it is a desire. It's a human desire for stability, right? So they want predictability, they want that. But in a way, when you look
Yeah.
at nature by itself, right? Nature by itself is actually
Yep.
produces avalanches and earthquakes and these kind of epiphenomenon, ice ages, and these kind of cataclysmic events, the creation of the moon, like these kind of huge cosmological events, right? So I guess what I'm expressing is at some level that one way that the system design sort of works in context is really more to have nature continue to assert supremacy, right? Because in a sense, this stability is artificial.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a human construct.
Yeah, and there is a layer in between, which is kind of the evolutionary stable strategies by kind of selfish gene by Dawkins. Like,
Hmm.
then you talk about like, okay, here's an evolutionary stable strategy, and then there's organized criticality, and then there's a Nash equilibrium on top of that. This
Yeah,
seems like three stratas which are
yeah,
scale decoupled from each other.
yep, yep.
We are very much like this. As you were saying, this conversation is very much about organizing what goes into which layer. Like, what is physics? What is chemistry? What is
Mm.
biology? What is sociology? What is economics? And this kind of like plate tectonic, organized criticality, evolutionary stable patterns is kind of biology, and then Nash equilibrium is kind of a sociology concept.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do like that, right? Because when you look at the Nash equilibrium, it is a social construct, right? Which is effectively it's a game theory where the best strategy is to play the same strategy over and over, right? And so the human desire for stability creates these kinds of constructs, right? But in a sense, the supremacy of nature is is
Yeah.
sort of the chaotic element, right? Because, at the end of the day, when you look at it from a laminar perspective, right, it's something like, of course, people create these sort of stable havens,
Yeah.
out of their desire for kind of peace and harmony and tranquility, right? But ultimately, as you say, in the context of Eve and Eden,
Yeah.
right, it is that Eden is boring, right? So in a sense, like that, you can't even allow the humans within a game to create a long running metastable Nash equilibrium, because in a sense what you're saying is that that is boring. That's the, there's no, everything is just like people are getting, free money by can mining, and these other guys have agreed not to attack, and so then you just sit there for like forever and everybody just does nothing, right? And that obviously can't be allowed, right? Like that makes for the it's really strange, right? Because humans may strive to try to create utopia, right? But they don't tolerate it well. They don't. It doesn't make for excitement or drama or anything, right? So in a way, like it's funny because another kind of dimensional slice is whether kind of the PvP
Mm.
game and the PvE game, right? Because in a sense, like the PvP game, can stagnate in the sense of the Nash equilibrium, whereas the PvE game, because ultimately the environment, becomes this force, right? And as you
Mm.
describe with these initial beginnings of the game, if it's individual survival and base building within the starter zone, right, then it becomes PvE, right, where you're in the environment, you're going against the environment, right? And then the higher levels of the game, it shifts towards PvP, right? But maybe at some point when the PvP happens, it becomes PvE again.
I like the word you use, ossification. Perhaps more precise than stagnation. Like, I think what we are ultimately, by making the core property of the world more anthropic, is to prevent this kind of potentially eventual ossification. So I think when you think about blockchains overall in that, I think that has more just to do with disruption through technology. Technological advancement does a lot of this kind of disrupting ossified patterns just through tech disruption. So it's not really like a nature property, it's more like tech disruption. And so I haven't gone all the way there how to allow people to invent new technology in a game where it just doesn't become overpowered. But the fact, yeah, the fact that you can program in the game already does create a bit of technology disruption. It is technology disruption in software, not hardware. But it is disruption for sure. But the ultimate boss of player invention seems to be something like true chemistry in a game, where you can truly, through like chemistry like invention, I've now invented a new way
Yeah.
to make a protein to do some like nanotech stuff. It was like I was reading about this, like whatever, I wasn't fully, my brain wasn't fully switched on, but they found some bacteria. No, they found some cell in the deep ocean which had incorporated a new bacteria into it, just like our mitochondria is
Yeah,
basically
mitochondria.
an adopted bacteria, and the chlorophyll in plants is a similar one. But they found a new one that made something about nitrogen that they think is a new way to make solid state fuels. And they just found this bacteria, and this bacteria is a fairly new evolutionary phenomena. And that is such a great example of like multi-states invention. There's some bacteria in the deep ocean that adopted a bacteria, like how all life came from that. This is a fairly recent one. And as the biologist and chemist are tinkering with it, they might come up with a way to make a new solid state fuel basically for rockets. So some recent biological invention allows us to go to the moon again. Like if you trace that path, to find a way to do this in a game, I'm not there yet. But let's see.
Yeah, I mean, it's very complex because obviously technology can change everything,
Yeah,
right? Like, and the thing that's crazy is, as the AI revolution spawns, we're actually, to me, the function of intelligence is process optimization. And
yeah,
so,
yes,
it feels like
yeah,
that's a pretty big part of the kind of the major technology disruption of today. And so, I think drawing attention to
yeah,
this, and and obviously looking at things like how weapons, especially in your cruel world, how the kind of weapons technology transfer kind of helps to create disruption, but also a
yeah,
bit about kind of game modding too, right? Which is that
yeah.
the creativity of not just players, but, player developers or developers, and also how blockchain as a technology can incentivize these developments.
Yeah. So I mean, now you're touching a bit of a nerve, in a good and bad way. Um, the Yeah, you're tickling and discomfort. So the 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 full architecture is not yet realized. We still do have servers, like to orchestrate the frontier. There's a blockchain, there's a client, and there's a server. And the database is gone; it's been replaced by blockchain. But there is a path to get rid of the servers. The 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 sure way to do it is to have indistinguishability obfuscation. That's perhaps a decade or two off, and obviously is the final boss of all cryptography. And once we have that, we can do anything really. But there are little snippets of zero knowledge proof, program obfuscation, multi-party computing, homomorphic encryption. Like there are now bits and pieces where you can sort of piece together some Frankenstein way to allow private servers to exist in an MMO and make it sound
Mm.
such that somebody can find a deep sea bacteria that enables
Oh,
going to the moon.
wow. Oh, wow.
Like there is a
That's
theoretical
cool.
construct that can thread all the needles and make all this happen. So it's not like pure science fiction to make it happen. But I mean, we're still at some Maslow hierarchy of needs, just getting the basic stuff up and running. But in the decades to follow, I very much see where people can have private servers. Basically, you can run your custom solar system simulation,
Wow. Wow.
and it has guaranteed economic properties
Mm.
such that you understand when you take your assets into that solar system
Yeah.
that you understand the exposure you're exposing yourself to. And it can be cryptographically guaranteed that there is not more exposure. Like
Oh.
somebody cannot trap you in their system
Oh.
because you are now on their private server, and now they can and overwrite memory addresses, and voila,
Oh,
all your
wow.
stuff is gone.
Oh, wow.
So there is a way. There is a way to do this. Yeah, like I said, indistinguishability obfuscation allows you to do it. But I mean, we just got program obfuscation. Like I think 22 is the first paper about some degree of program obfuscation. So, and that's an overkill. Let's say we have that in 20 years. But on the way to that, there are bits and pieces that allow you to nibble at this, where the servers can truly disappear, and not only disappear, they can be hosted,
Mm.
or
Yeah.
hosted is even maybe not like a proper term. Like they can belong to somebody where somebody can modify physics to some extent. It's maybe not the correct abstraction to think about it as physics, but it is doable. And then truly the world is fully autonomous. Like nobody has to do anything other than just start the client, which in a way could also run the server and run the validator and everything. And voila, just that network makes the whole game come alive. Through the emergence of people playing it, the world lives as an emergent property of just the fact that people are playing it.
Yeah, that is it exceedingly profound, right? Obviously, when you look at the blockchain principles, it goes far beyond kind of the simple things like chaining blocks for immutability or, really basic layer things like machine consensus of data state, these type of things and replication, stuff like that. And it gets all the way to kind of consent and open source culture, right? Which has to do with things like forking, right? Because to me, I think the thing that you're talking about in terms of you know adversarial behavior is really the danger, right? Because if you do fly your ship into someone's server,
Yep.
and then they basically is like a rug pull server, right? Your ship is instantly dissolved and then given as parts to salvage for them, then this is definitely not okay, right? Like this is just a full on rug pull server, and obviously you could argue that that's part of the game, but I think it's not that you can't do that. Like there needs to be some way to establish the nature of the space and in terms of established fairness, right? Obviously, the centralized version of that is something like an app store, right? Like, where Apple basically screens apps and says, oh, this app is bad. You're not allowed to publish the app, right? It's not permissionless. It's not decentralized. It's not blockchain culture, right? And in a sense, open source is a big deal. But not every single person can maybe read and understand open source. I do think that AI provides some measure of promise in this regard, in the sense that, like, even if you personally can't really read the source code, you can still send an AI and ask it. You can say, like, hey, like, does this code contain? Anything problematic? Is there any cheat codes in here? Am I think an sufficiently advanced AI could, I mean, it can already read legal contracts and like look for things like gotchas, right? So why wouldn't it be able to read a source code and say, you shouldn't play on this server? Like you should not send your valuable ship into this server because it's getting right access to, your ship and it'll destroy it.
So, what is often helpful to me is to distinguish between world creation and game creation.
Mm,
Like the, uh, I think what a lot of what we're talking about here is world creation. Like we are, we are talking about like sort of what is diegetic in a way, but we're using science language to define what is diegetic, canonical,
mm,
these kind of things.
yeah.
Like, and we are using some language of verisimilitude of like what makes this world
Mm,
have the property of verisimilitude.
yeah.
So I think we are in the domain of like world creation. Then the domain of game creation on top of that world substrate is actually like another topic. And often we are not very we're not well organized in our own thinking about like attributing what is the world, what is the game, what is the economy, what is the physics, and all that. We've gotten better in doing it over time. Like we've just gotten better through trial and error and understanding the boundaries and skill decoupling and now critical organizationality and whatnot.
Yeah.
So part of what I think will, and we have seen in some of our hackathons, is that people are making new games on top of the world. Um,
Yeah.
and the games are often more like a game mode on top of the world physics, combat mechanics. You've just made now a meta game. Like a good example of that is,
Mm,
I mean, imagine if somebody were to make like spaceship football, like which you could absolutely do, just with the composition tools we have already. You make a goal, you make a scoreboard, and then just with the collision mechanics, you can now bump a ball, and when you score a goal, it goes up. And now you may have made a league of spaceship football players.
mm,
Like now that is an esports inside frontier. People driving spaceships to bump balls into a target, kind of like Rocket League in space in a way.
yeah.
And somebody just today could just make Spaceship Rocket League in eFrontier and just sell tickets and do betting and whatever. Right now, somebody could make that.
Mm.
They would break none of the physics by doing this. They are composing the existing world order with new game mechanics. And this is purely canonical and diegetic and doesn't break the world in any way. This is just somebody using the fact you can add new codes to the server to implement this level, which is the field, with these mechanics. And as long as you have somebody entering the field with the mechanics, and you have somebody, actually, you need an army to protect the boundaries so that somebody doesn't mess with the game. And maybe we could come up with constructs to allow you maybe to create a bit of a bubble of sanity with some way to have entry tickets, and it has a lot of hit power, so at least you have some way to create like a temporary shielded area. And voila, now you can make Spaceship Rocket League as a game mode inside the Frontier.
Yeah.
Just like kind of Defend of the Ancient was a game mode for Warcraft 3.
Yeah. Super important reference, obviously, right? Because when you look at the rise of Dota, right, in the Warcraft context, like this is so seminal because it really created the transition between RTS and MOBA, right? So in a sense, like the world moved into MOBA. And the thing that was sad, and I think that the promise of what you're describing is is that you really don't want to be Blizzard in this story, right? What you want to be is you want to be Riot because in a sense, like there were multiple MOBAs that were born kind of in the rise of Dota. And the players were the ones who basically modded and evolved, right? So like I think that the core construct here is that if you're successful in capturing the energy and creativity of your player base, like you can absolutely evolve the game and the game can evolve itself, right? Because in a sense, like, obviously my rug pull universe, right, which is sort of your ship flies in and then it's destroyed and it's given to the server owner. Like this kind of malevolent universe obviously isn't the type of thing that will take off, but like others could, right?
So I think the I mean, pay to win is a very broad topic.
Mm, mm.
So I mean, there are many
Yeah,
angles
yeah.
to it.
Look into that.
How I think about it in the context of what we make is that there should be nothing that cheats physics of the world.
Mm,
So, because generally what happens when companies are selling you something that you can buy one-to-one,
yeah.
you have like golden ammo, just to make an example. I can buy golden ammo and I can shoot it, and I just turn dollars into bullets. But nobody made the bullets. The bullets, the golden ammo was just made out of thin air.
Mm.
And generally, games are not economies, like in the sense of like everything in Eve Online is made by players.
Okay, so now we have to get into the dreaded bugbear of this topic, which is Web3 gaming, which a lot of people kind of struggle with this idea that there could be pay to win, right? So I do think that ever since Machine Zone and some of these kind of pay to win games, this has been a specter.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, like pay to win is a big topic and has a lot of kind of strangly angles to it. But how we think about it is that generally what we want is that everything in the world is made by somebody in the world. Items do not enter the world through some publisher magic. We have largely held this up in Eve. There is a bit of cosmetics which are just created through buying it. The cosmetics are not made. We have actually redone that quite a bit with a ship skinning tool called Skinner, where actually the elements there are kind of made out of materials.
Mm.
So I generally think as long as everything in the world is made by somebody, everything in the world can be destroyed, then everything in the world is adhering to physics. And then if people are trading amongst themselves through either in-game money or out-of-game money and whatnot, I think that matters less if the benefactor of that transaction is somebody that made stuff in the economy.
Mm.
I think where we have had problems is that when we are selling ready-made items, which are not made by somebody in the
Mm.
economy, but just made
Ha.
by magic
Ha.
from
Yeah.
us. There's a very interesting pattern about something called like starter pack. Because like when you start playing Eve, then some of the people which are now going to playing against have been playing Eve Online for 22
Wow.
years. And maybe you wish that you could have just played a little, played a little, started playing a little sooner, or you had a quicker way to catch up, or you just had some focus in your experience. Is there some equipment I can just buy to kind of
Sure.
get
Yes.
focus and whatnot? And we were selling these kind of starter packs, and generally, like what is okay if the starter packs include cosmetics, our hard currency called Plex, which again is like a tokenized subscription time, very much inspired by African cell phone minutes, actually. It's another tangential story, but let's park that a bit. But we started to sell pre-made ships, which are like, here's a ship with some fittings, etc., and it's in the new player starter pack. Yeah, you would think so. Ah, nice. But the problem there is that nobody made the ship in the starter pack, because I mean we were kind of doing it as a test, time to market, to see if it would help with new players. So we kind of just made ships out of nothing and put them in the pack when the person buys. People were not happy about this. So we actually went through the elaborative journey of, and this is about to be done or done. I actually will need to catch on the actual timeline. But where somebody would make the ships, we put in the starter packs.
Yeah.
So instead of us cheat coding the ships, even if these were small, kind of relatively insignificant
Mm.
ships for EVE players or for new players, it was disliked as cheating the economy. It wasn't like pay
Mm.
to win per se. You weren't like buying something that nobody else could have. You could have earned the ship in game. This was more just like a little sort of leg up for new players. But to adhere to the diegetic verisimilitude of the game, we needed to do this correctly to buy the ships off the market, us, the company, the pack, and then give them to them.
Yeah. Makes
So
sense.
this is what we have found, that even if through this Plex mechanism you can buy Plex, you can sell that Plex for ISK to another player, then you can use that ISK to buy whatever your heart desires. As long as the benefactor is another player and CCP just takes a transaction fee, is not like making items out of nothing, etc., that feels a lot less pay to win than if somehow we cheated physics to create the item. So this is a little bit like, imagine like government procurement. I am running the government. I collect taxes from the populace. I need to build a kindergarten,
Mm.
and because we are both a government and we have godly powers, I would have to pay a contractor to build the kindergarten, as the government needs to do, instead of like using my godly powers to just manifest the kindergarten out of my godly powers. So by printing money, or in this case, a kindergarten, by printing a kindergarten out of our ability just to compose atoms with our brain power or something. Some Zeus-like story there when Zeus refused to
Nice.
magic the kindergarten and had to go and make it himself, and that became a meaningful experience for Seuss. There's probably some
I'm
parable
sure.
in some like of your vast memory of all those things you could dig up. So this becomes a bit of a foundation of getting out of this kind of
Mm.
pay to win thing. So sure, somebody might come into the game, want to spend a lot of money, but the recipients of that would be the denizens of the world, not us, the proprietor, because we would not be selling it. Somebody else would be selling it. And then it's a little bit like a rich tourist that comes to a country. That rich tourist might be paying to win the country, but the local population benefits.
Mhm.
So, I mean, and that's why we have like a tourism
That's
in.
fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
it really speaks to the integrity of the environment, right? And I think fairness, right? It's obviously people don't want the environment to cheat. They don't want kind of
Yeah.
this weird God powers, right? So that feels really unfair
Yes.
and bad at a fundamental, deep level. So, that's autonomy.
There's no real winning anyway. That it's a hollow experience. Whereas going backpacking somewhere in the, I don't know, in Burma, on your own, where it's probably a much more meaningful experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
being more meaningful than real life is a big issue, right? So, I think that's the big challenge, which is how do you retain sovereignty, integrity, and faithfulness? And, I think the idea of things being meaningful or more meaningful than real life, in a way, I think has to do with things being more fair than real life, right? Because in a way, like some of the meaninglessness that comes into real life is kind of the unfairness of normal life, right? So in a sense, if things are unfair and random, they people want to get away.
So this this
Mm,
autonomy
yeah.
of the world being made real through, okay, decentralization is a word, but it has a certain connotation, through lack of centralization. It's more to talk about the, like, what is gone, like, rather than the solution. If decentralization is one of the solutions, but it's more the centralization which we want to remove. Like we want to not be, to have centralized fault points. Kind of like the internet is designed for fault tolerance. Yeah, fault tolerance is probably a good way to think about it. To make this world as fault tolerant as can be. Like there is no single person, company, group of people, etc., where if they were to disappear, the whole thing would lose its ability to be autonomous. So to have this kind of fault tolerant autonomy, if we say that Eve's even lines autonomy is upheld by the legal construct of a company, the the property of a company that is a board of directors and a CEO and a management team and a development team, etc. This is a certain type of construct that if this construct were to immediately disappear, just snap your finger Thanos style,
Mm.
then it would not be in a good place. I do think it might be able to survive it. Like there's just so much in the resilience of the community. I think it might somehow reach autonomy, even if it would be some compromised autonomy. But I I would like to find a way to build virtual worlds where the fault tolerance is not just in, we have two database servers which are fault tolerant. The whole ecosystem is not dependent on
Mm.
kind of identifiable entities that are required to exist for the world to exist. That the world somehow arises beyond that. And that was one of the properties that attracted me to this kind of the way decentralization is achieved in blockchains. But I mean, that decentralization is also achieved with the internet itself. So, and I was making distributed computing back in my VRML days in the late 90s. And I always found that interesting, that here's something that exists, it just exists. It's kind of like the early internet was. Like there weren't really any sort of AWS servers, etc. You just like opened a port on your computer and voila, your website existed if your computer existed. And sure, that's not very fault tolerant to just to have, but there is something about like to have an execution environment, not just a network environment, that is truly autonomous. It just exists. And then to put a world inside that fabric, so to speak. And I would I would I would very much love to achieve that where it truly can just kind of live on its own, and as long as there are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people, it still exists. Kind of like how a country exists. Like a countries are fairly fault tolerant. Like if you look at them, some of them are pretty old. I mean, if you have to go to the like the Versailles Agreement to go into the technical term of like what is a country. Well, cities are a better construct. Like cities are, again, going back to Rome. Rome has existed for thousands of years, and will probably exist for a thousand more. There's something about it that, okay, sure, maybe not like a comet or something like there's and plate tectonics ultimately will destroy everything on a long enough timeline. But to build a world where these kind of properties of autonomy, decentralization, etc., can truly be properly manifested. And I believe by building, at least on what we're currently building on with Frontier, we have like established some base layer construct where things will at least persist autonomously for a long time. Then they will be alive autonomously for a long time. And then you kind of go up the stack as we get more and more, well, mainly cryptography construct to make that truly manifest. And then the world is unstoppable.
I kind of love the unstoppability principle as pertains to blockchain, right? Because essentially, blockchain is a attempt to take away fiat of money, right? Which is fiat is because I said so. That's fiat, right? Whereas the idea of Bitcoin is the idea of because we said so, which is consensus. So it's consensus money, right? So you're saying like the as long as there are people who continue to play, there will be a game, right? And this is really the soul of autonomy, of sovereignty that comes from consensus and community, right? So the honoring of the player and the way you have integrity, I think, is so vital to the living of this game forever because it respects the player. If you look at Homer's Iliad, Achilles can't fight anymore because the king is unjust, right? And in a way, his rage is really, reaches the ears of Zeus, but it turns out that that it isn't a god that cures Achilles, the pain of Achilles, right? It's actually what cures him is another king, which is Priam, right? Which is the when Priam comes to visit him in his tent unarmed to ask him for the body of his son, right? He's healed in that moment, right? And so to me, I kind of expected to be speaking with a gamer god, right? Because you have created a universe, right? But in a sense, I think you are much more of the model of like a gamer king, right? In the sense that you yourself see yourself as mortal, right? And that you see yourself as subject to the laws of the game, and you see the game as bigger than yourself. So that's impressive.
Yes, I've had time on my side to deeply consider this in the crucible of coexisting with EVE Online.
It's tremendous, and I just want to thank you very deeply. It's just been a tremendous
Yeah,
honor. It's so exciting to hear about this adventure for you, the blockchain.
yeah. Thank you as well. I actually learned a lot from this conversation. You have many different sort of tangential angles to enter into this. And now I need to go and read Per Bach on self-organized criticality. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack, and obviously this has been an epic conversation. So super enjoyed it. I've been talking about Web3 gaming for a long time, and to me, this is always in the state where we're one potential hit game away from being an industry and transforming an industry of gaming, which is in bad need of transformation, to be honest, right? We're struggling a little bit. The big hit mobile game is Monopoly Go. The big hit VR game is Gorilla Tag. Like, we're just really in a degenerate state looking for a way out, not as sort of a crypto industry, which has found product market fit in financial services, in tokenization, in Bitcoin, in reserve assets, so but it's more the game industry is the one that needs a blockchain, right? It's so to me, the game industry needs help. And we are one hit game away from Web3 gaming. And to me, the thing that I got the most out of this conversation with Hilmar is that, he has the integrity. He's really very faithful. He doesn't see himself as like a game god, even though he should. I mean, there's definitely some big names in the industry, but very few have made games of this durability, of this stature. And obviously, it's really part of this extreme, long lasting, durable vision of decades. So, to me, I feel like his integrity and faithfulness will allow the game players to potentially build this transcendental game. Transcendental, in the sense that the goal is for the game to go on forever. And when you look at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy, there's self-actualization, but beyond it, there's self-transcendence, right? So like, if Hilmar is successful, people in the far future will continue to play, EVE Online. Part of my, excitement and passion for this overall topic is that I do think that this kind of savagery, this kind of brutality, this PvP, this kind of hyper cruel but fair universe is something that is truly inescapable. I do think that Hilmar has made that point very clear, which is that this kind of like the matrix, the kind of utopian matrix isn't acceptable to humans, right? So humans always have a passion to fight. And to me, the blockchain itself has become a war theater because it is fair. So, if you are North Korea and you steal money on the blockchain, the bank can't suddenly reverse the transaction. There's no, so I'm not saying that's a great thing. Obviously, we don't want North Koreans stealing money from, legitimate actors in financial services or anyone else. But like, to me, what I'm articulating is that it is the decentralization principle is a principle where the system itself is fair, right? And so to me, if humans must war, then like, why not war inside of a simulation, inside of a game, inside of a virtual universe? And, to really have this, combative human nature, expressed in a virtual reality, where it's violence without violence within a frame of nonviolence, right? So to me, like, there's a deep future for this type of scenario, and I'm really hoping that we really see transformation of gaming, of metaverse, virtual and augmented realities, and really just a much broader humanistic and cybernetic future. And I think Hilmar is definitely one of the people that will help get us there. So very exciting
Yeah.
conversation, and I hope you enjoyed
Yes.
it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.